Chapter 12:11. Luo Qingwu placed the Xianxie sword across her knees, then took a portable elixir and breathed in and out carefully to replenish the sword aura and magical power she had lost. She was not known for her powerful magical power, but her sword Dao magical power was powerful and sharp, which consumed a lot of her magical power. Zhuge Zhan looked at Luo Qingwu, his eyes flashing slightly. The sword formation of heavenly primordium was extremely powerful, and its murderous intent was even more awe-inspiring. One moment of carelessness, and one would die under the sword. Although Luo Qingwu's magical power far exceeded that of ordinary Yuanian cultivators, and she was even more proficient in sword Dao, and had defeated a group of primordial spirit realm sword cultivators from Shu Mountain, it was still extremely dangerous for her to face the power of the sword formation of heavenly primordium. He had some understanding of Luo Qingwu's level of cultivation. At this moment, as he felt the sword will around Luo Qingwu, he had a general idea of what she wanted to do. The purple-clothed girl before him, after the battle with the Shu Mountain sword cultivators, had gained more than when she fought with others. At this moment, she was trying to open the door to the primordial spirit. In facing the power of the sword formation of heavenly primordium, she had to ensure that she could take that step steadily and achieve the realm of primordial spirit as one with heaven and earth. Speaking of Zhuge Zhan's character, there was no doubt that he appreciated Luo Qingwu's choice. However, as a guest elder of Xianmen Tianzong, he was usually treated with courtesy by Lin Feng and Luo Qingwu, and his daughter, Zhuge Wanxiu, was even taught by Xianmen Tianzong. On this trip to Shu Mountain, Zhuge Zhan felt that he had an obligation to ensure Luo Qingwu's safety. He knew very well that the girl in front of him was the youngest disciple of the master of the celestial sect of wonders, Lin Feng. She might even be the last disciple. Usually in Xianmen Tianzong, from Lin Feng to Xiao Yin, Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, Shi Tianhao, and other senior brothers and sister Yuhan Yin, they all doted on her. She was born with a pure Yin body. Ever since she entered Xianmen Tianzong, everything had been smooth sailing for her. Whether it was the speed of her cultivation or her fighting ability, there were very few people in her generation who could match her. After attaining the supreme Dao foundation, he established the supreme pill cauldron. When he formed his core, his purple core gave birth to a strange phenomenon. Later on, he achieved Yuanying and even cultivated the divine light of creation, which was rarely seen since ancient times. In a sense, ever since she entered Xianmen Tianzong and became Lin Feng's personal disciple, Luo Qingwu could be said to have been doted on by everyone. She was one of the few geniuses in the human cultivation world in the entire Divine Land. After learning under Lin Feng's tutelage, Luo Qingwu's path was smooth and her future was boundless. For others, the primordial soul realm was extremely difficult. But for Luo Qingwu, with her talent, the diligence she had shown in the past, and her current status, it was not certain that she would succeed in attaining the primordial soul realm. But not succeeding was much more difficult than succeeding. Although the situation in today's battle was full of changes and not clear, it had not deteriorated to the extent that Luo Qingwu had to face the heavenly sword formation of primordial beginning and take a huge risk to seek a breakthrough. Sword Venerable Firmament had already entered the formation. If his attention was temporarily diverted from Sword Venerable Tiangang to here, Luo Qingwu could die here at any time. Zhuge Zhan looked at the young girl in purple before him. "Girl, have you thought it through? Putting aside the fact that you might not need to take such a huge risk, even if you do, your eldest senior brother, Xiao Yin, is already on his way." A light smile appeared on Luo Qingwu's face. "Mr. Zhuge, I can't thank you enough for your concern, but I'm not doing this on a whim. I've always known that Master, senior brothers and sisters, and Mr. Zhuge, all of you care and concern for me. Without Master and all of you, I wouldn't be who I am today. Master once said that if he can protect me now, he can protect me forever." Luo Qingwu's gaze was calm and gentle, but there was determination in it. "This is my master's domineering nature, and also my luck. But if I live under Master's protection for the rest of my life like a little girl who can't grow up, I'll be tarnishing Master's reputation. It's also not the path that I want to take. In front of Master, I will always be a child, but when I go out, I am Master's disciple, and I will be the vanguard of the sect. Luo Qingwu closed her eyes and looked calm. Eldest senior brother is indeed on his way, but this can't be the reason for me to stop moving forward, and it can't be an excuse for me to be lazy and dependent. When the sect needs me, I am duty-bound. Zhuge Zhan heard this and laughed. Good. Well said, I like it. In that case, you should be careful. Such a sword with such a bright future, don't let it fall here. As soon as he finished speaking, his magic power changed. Streaks of green light penetrated through the seven-colored rainbow and landed on Luo Qingwu. Luo Qingwu smiled. Where my sword points, it is not afraid of the erosion of rain, snow, wind, and frost, nor the tempering of ice and fire, nor bending or damage. If it breaks here, it only proves that I was too lazy before. After all, I'm just a piece of rotten wood, not refined iron, and I can't make a good sword. The green light kept surging on the surface of Luo Qingwu's body. The light did not seem sharp, but it was the sword light formed by the power of the heavenly sword formation driven by sword venerable firmament. It was almost invincible, although most of the power was used to refine the heavenly sword and defend against sword venerable Tiangang. Zhuge Zhan would also control the intensity, so it was impossible for him to let too much sword light in at once. But the moment the green light really came close, Luo Qingwu still felt the pressure, especially when she was out of yuanying. At this moment, facing the sword light in yuanying, she felt as if she was in an ethereal world. There was nothing around her, and the blue sky above her head covered the dome. In this empty world, it was filled with sword chi and sword intent that sent chills down one's spine. It seemed invisible and traceless, but in fact, it was everywhere. It was much more terrifying than the peak of the Taiyin sword. The sword will in the Taiyin sword realm was like thousands of dust particles, pervasive and omnipresent. In this world of sword light, the sword will and sword chi seemed to have become the air that people breathed and the spirit chi that cultivators breathed. Everything seemed to be composed of endless sword chi at this moment, tightly surrounding all the living beings in the world without the slightest gap. This was the true meaning of being untraceable, yet omnipresent and all-pervasive. Not to mention breathing. Even if she did not move, the 36,000 pores on her body could feel it, as if there were countless swords on her body. Luo Qingwu's expression was infected, and a light shadow above her head, similar to her own appearance. At this moment in the green light, it was actually dancing. In this process, the green sword light kept changing, and the green light world gradually changed, turning into a green sword light again, dancing in the void together with Luo Qingwu's yuanying. For a moment, the sword light circled, and her clothes fluttered. Seeing this, Sword Venerable Moon, Sword Venerable Shaoshang, Sword Venerable Guanchong, and Sword Venerable Xiao Zi immediately came to a realization. This woman actually wants to prove her primordial soul Tao in our sect's heavenly immortal primordium sword array. The others were still fine, but Sword Venerable Guanchong's expressionless face revealed an expression of shock and anger, and his eyes flashed with an unbearable look. The scene before him could not help but evoke the memory that was deeply engraved in his heart. Back then, after Xiao Yin crippled Guanchong with one palm and seriously injured him, he then faced the pressure of a Tao integration realm expert breaking the falling rocks and broke through the bottleneck, successfully proving his primordial soul Tao. After that, with his primordial soul initial stage body, he forced a Tao integration realm sword cultivator to break the falling rocks and not dare to chase after him. At this moment, Luo Qingwu's actions were like yesterday, making Sword Venerable Guanchong recall the unbearable past of the past. You're too much. Sword Venerable Moon guided the moon sword technique, and the moon sword turned into millions of thin threads, once again attacking Luo Qingwu. Sword Venerable Guanchong and the other two beside him did the same. However, Zhuge Zhan snorted coldly. He raised one hand and blocked the green light emitted by the heavenly immortal primordium sword array, while his other hand slapped toward Sword Venerable Moon and the others. A rainbow streaked across the sky, suddenly turning into a seven-colored light that split apart, as if seven different colored, radiant rivers were flowing side by side. These seven rainbow-colored lights split and joined together, revealing the power concept of changing between illusory and real. They stood in front of the great Yin, Sword Venerable, and the others, blocking all the attacks that they attempted to attack Luo Qingwu. Even Sword Venerable Moon's countless qi threads were entangled by the seven-colored light, unable to escape. At the same time, Luo Qingwu took out a small porcelain bottle. After opening the bottle, Luo Qingwu took a light breath, and a cloud of qi flew out and was swallowed by her. Luo Qingwu's heaven and earth form also appeared behind her at this moment. It was also shrouded by the vast green sword light. Under the pressure of the green light, Luo Qingwu's Dharma power even began to show slight cracks. But at this moment, the young girl's heart and soul were clear, unprecedentedly clear. In her mind, images flashed one after another. The one that left the deepest impression was when the spirit pearl of Heaven Yin had been broken, and she had tasted the feeling of falling from the clouds to the bottom of the valley in her family. After that, she became a disciple of Lin Feng and was able to reconstruct her purine body. She remembered the calm and gentle young man in purple standing in front of her, smiling calmly. For some unknown reason, it was clearly a matter of great ups and downs, a matter of great sorrow and great joy, but under the calm smile of this purple-clothed youth, it was as if everything had become calm. A calm smile also appeared at the corner of Luo Qingwu's mouth, and she said softly, "Master, I will never forget the grace of giving me a new life." Her body, which was sitting cross-legged on the ground, suddenly stood up and then prostrated in the direction of Kunlun Mountain with her sword. At this moment, she felt that the door of the primordial spirit, which was once blurry, was now extremely clear. Yuanying merged with the Dharma power, and together they blasted open the door. Luo Qingwu's Dharma form of heaven and earth disintegrated and turned into talisman seeds after she passed through the door of the void and accepted the baptism of the great path law of heaven and earth. Inside each seed, there were infinite sword lights flashing and shining. The next moment, these talisman seeds turned into a huge Tai Chi diagram in the void, half black and half white. The two levels blended together, and slowly it turned. On the Tai Chi diagram, rays of sword light shot up into the sky. Within the layers of sword light, there seemed to be a light figure dancing, and the whole world was her companion. A song rang out in the immortal heaven sword formation, and the voice was clear and melodious. Above the yin and yang sea, I change my sword, half in the dust, half in the sky. Between Kunlun Mountain flies purple clouds, and with a sword in hand, the world does not count years. Chapter 12:12. Layers upon layers of purple sword shadows flashed between heaven and earth, colliding with the surrounding green light. The green light seemed to be enraged by the purple light flashing on the Taiji diagram formed by Luo Qingwu's primordial spirit. However, although the sharp and spirited purple light was inferior in scale, it seemed to be superior in quality. The sharp sword intent and the green light of the heavenly immortal primordial beginning sword formation clashed, neither giving way. Zhuge Zhan was watching over Luo Qingwu from the side. Sensing the unique and profound sword intent of the young girl who had just formed her primordial spirit, he nodded repeatedly. She's just formed her primordial spirit, yet she's already so extraordinary. The profound chase sword and the seven treasures bamboo fire staff were swept up by the Taiji diagram. The Taiji diagram spun in the air, and as the purple sword light filled the air, it once again turned into Luo Qingwu's appearance. The young girl stood in the air, still dressed in purple. Her long black hair was simply held in place by a white jade hairpin behind her head. At this moment, her beautiful hair also flashed with lustrous purple light. The young girl smiled. She was very happy, and at this moment, she was as happy as a child. Master Xiao Wu succeeded. She stretched out her empty right hand, and black ice crystals once again appeared on her palm, condensing into an ice sword. The sword was still completely black, and it emitted the power concept of extreme yin, extreme cold, and extreme darkness. However, unlike before, the current profound Che sword, that clear and clean blade that did not reflect any light, actually faintly flashed with a purple flowing light. It was as if the center of the sword, condensed from black ice crystals, had an additional essence of ice. Silently, the purple light flickered erratically on the black sword blade, but the sharp coldness and sword intent revealed by the profound Che sword were even deeper and colder. The sword intent aura circulated in the surrounding space, as if it was going to freeze the entire world and plunge it into eternal darkness and silence. Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword and the others looked serious. They knew that Luo Qingwu was refining her natal sword when she formed her primordial spirit. She was using this opportunity to refine her natal sword into a Dharma treasure. What caught the attention of the Shu Mountain crowd was that Luo Qingwu's profound clarity sword had perfectly refined her own sword will, Xianmen Tianzong's technique, and the unique power contained in her purine body. Even though the transcendent artifact was in its early stages, its piercingly cold might had already far surpassed most spirit-nurturing grade transcendent artifacts in this world. They were both swords with ice-cold sword intent, but the might of Luo Qingwu's profound, clear sword, which was at the spirit-nurturing stage, actually seemed to surpass the transformation stage magic treasure of the Heavenly Pool sect, the icy soul misty cloud. In terms of strength, it might be slightly weaker, but the sharpness of the sword intent, as well as the coldness, surpassed it. Luo Qingwu's expression was tranquil as she looked at Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword and the others. She smiled slightly, and then the tip of the profound, clear sword in her hand moved. Instantly, a purple sword light traversed the void and slashed towards Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword and the others. The expression of the Sword Lord of Moon changed slightly, and he activated his Sword of Moon to the extreme. Billions of threads of qi swirled and danced in the air, gathering together and transforming into clouds and mist, attempting to block Luo Qingwu's sword. However, as soon as Luo Qingwu's purple sword light flashed in the air and came into contact with the clouds and mist in front of the Taiyin swordsman, all the air threads formed by the sword intent of the Taiyin swordsman were silently frozen and condensed into purple ice crystals. These ice crystals didn't freeze the entire cloud, but the billions of strands of qi. Each strand of qi was individually frozen, turning into winding ice crystal threads. Even though the threads of qi were originally tightly entwined, under the effect of the purple sword light, they were all clearly separated and sealed in ice. However, even though they were clearly separated, all the threads of qi could not change the same fate. All the threads of qi that came into contact with the purple sword light were all frozen. Seeing this, Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword's expression suddenly changed. Without any hesitation, he raised the Guanchong sword again, turning the Lunar Sword into the Guanchong sword. Using the power of the Guanchong sword, he pushed the power of the Guanchong sword, which was best at defense among the 6 meridian swords of Shushan, to the limit that he could exert. Streaks of black sword light rose from the ground and protected Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword, Guanchong sword, and the others like layers of cities. But the purple sword light from Luo Qingwu seemed to turn a blind eye to this and continued to push forward. At this moment, the powerful force caused Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword and the others to once again be in the strange world where yin and yang were separated. Where the purple sword light spread, a pale, icy blue glow could be vaguely seen. And outside the purple light, in the space where Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword and the others were in, There was a black smoke-like brilliance rising. As this black smoke-like brilliance flickered, it formed a pincer attack with Luo Qingwu's purple sword light, continuously crushing the sword light from the sword lord of the lunar sword, Guancheng's sword. The thick and heavy sword light that seemed indestructible seemed incomparably fragile at this moment. Even though Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword incessantly urged his sword will and spiritual power, the speed of a newly formed sword light was far slower than the speed at which it was being destroyed by Luo Qingwu. Finally, the sword will of the heavy and heavy Guancheng sword was completely destroyed by Luo Qingwu's sword. That terrifying attack directly landed on the Guancheng sword. The Guancheng sword, one of the 6 meridian swords of Shushan, instantly wailed, unable to bear the burden. The eyes of Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword and the others almost popped out of their sockets. They saw that on the surface of the thick and wide sword body of the Guancheng sword, a large number of cracks appeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword only cultivated the Guancheng sword on the side, the power that he could exert when he activated this transformation-level magic treasure with his Void Return Realm cultivation base was enough to raise eyebrows. But at this moment, in the face of Luo Qingwu's sword, he could only watch helplessly as he walked step by step towards his doom. Retreat quickly! As Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword bellowed, Sword Lord of Little Shang and Sword Lord of Shaoza Sword did not dare to hesitate and immediately retreated. Sword Lord of Guan Cheng's sword stared fixedly at the Guancheng sword. With a turn of his body, he directly shed his human form and revealed his primordial spirit incarnation. He activated the power of the Guancheng sword and then added it to the Guancheng sword, intending to fight to the death with Luo Qingwu. But at this moment, the purple sword light activated by Luo Qingwu suddenly brightened, and the dermic powers of the sword intent increased once again. The mysterious and terrifying power erupted and directly shook the primordial spirit incarnation of Guancheng's sword away from the Guancheng sword. At this moment, the purple light swept across the sky and directly cut the primordial spirits of Guancheng's sword, Sword Lord of Little Shang's sword, and Sword Lord of Shaoza's sword in half. Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword was shocked. He saw that cracks kept appearing on the Guancheng sword in his hand, and it was also covered with a layer of frost as if it was reaching its end. At this moment, the world of green light manifested by the sword formation of heavenly primordium suddenly trembled. A great will seemed to have finally divided some of its attention and landed on Luo Qingwu. In the next moment, a strand of white sword chi suddenly separated from the green light and slashed towards Luo Qingwu. That white sword chi looked extremely weak, like a faint cloud of smoke, but also like a gust of wind. But it contained a great power that could pierce through the heavens and earth. It could evolve into thousands of sword daos. It was the ultimate sublimation after 10,000 swords become one, and it was also the starting point and origin of thousands of sword daos. It was both the starting point and the final destination. It was the ultimate technique of the Shushan sword sect, the heavenly immortal sword chi. The sword intent was pure and simple and terrifying. It wanted to break through all obstacles in front of it and pierce through the opponent. All obstructions were futile. That streak of white sword energy fell on the purple sword light that Luo Qingwu had activated. The purple sword light shook all of a sudden, as if it had come to a standstill, while the white sword energy actually began to gradually break through the purple sword light. Seeing this, Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword relaxed. Although this woman's sword Dao is strong, it cannot compare to her master's heaven-punishing sword chi, nor to our sect's heavenly immortal sword chi. Breaking through her sword Dao is only the beginning. One day, the sword of Shushan will surpass the sword of Xianmin and once again reach the peak of sword Dao in the Tianyuan Great World. Just as he breathed a sigh of relief, he saw Luo Qingwu suddenly change the stance of her sword. She flicked the blade of her profound clarity sword with her finger, giving off a low hum. Then, her figure turned in the air, and she had already shed her human form, revealing her primordial spirit incarnation. The Tai Chi diagram, which shone with sword light, covered a vast area. It slowly rotated in the air, and then the Tai Chi diagram gradually stood up, facing the heavenly immortal sword Chi and sword lord of the lunar sword. As the Tai Chi diagram rotated, a faint light gradually extended from the center of the Tai Chi diagram. It moved slowly, as if it had been forced out by a great force, but it revealed a soul-stirring sharpness. That light seemed invisible and colorless, but it was extremely bright and dazzling, like a sharp sword slowly unsheathing. Sword Lord of the Lunar Sword had cultivated the way of the sword all his life. Even if it was the way of the sword outside of Shu Mountain, he could more or less see the ins and outs of it. But now, when he saw the sword coming out of Luo Qingwu's primordial spirit incarnation, he felt inexplicably shocked. This was different from the heaven-punishing sword Qi and the heavenly immortal sword Qi. It was not as vicious as the heaven-punishing sword Qi, but it seemed to shake the very foundation of the heavenly immortal sword Qi. When the heavenly immortal sword Qi, which had turned the spiritual Qi of heaven and earth into a sword and all things into a sword, faced this sword, the surrounding vast thousand realms seemed to tremble together, making the heavenly immortal sword Qi unable to gather the power of heaven and earth. Luo Qingwu's calm voice came out of the Tai Chi diagram. This sword is called the primary spirit sword. It is a sword technique that I created after proving my primordial spirit. Seniors of the Shu Mountain Sword Sect, please correct me. The sword light shot out from the center of the Tai Chi diagram, turning into a straight beam of light that met the attacking heavenly immortal sword Qi. The white heavenly immortal sword Qi collided with the sword light of Luo Qingwu's primary spirit sword in the void, and the space at the point of contact suddenly twisted. The void there did not shatter, but as it twisted and rotated, it was like a whirlpool, drawing in the surrounding spiritual Qi, like an abyss that could never be filled. Sword Venerable Taiyin's expression became extremely ugly. Apart from the heaven-punishing sword Qi, Xianmin Tianzong actually has another sword technique that can compete with our heavenly immortal sword Qi. Although the heavenly immortal sword Qi was only a faint wisp, and although it was only a wisp of sword Qi that was temporarily separated from the immortal heaven primordium sword formation while fighting against the Big Dipper sword Venerable, it was a genuine heavenly immortal sword Qi that seemed to be able to split heaven and earth, and nothing in the world could block its sharpness. However, at this moment, it was blocked by Luo Qingwu's primary spirit sword and could not advance any further. On the other hand, this purple-clothed girl who had manifested her primordial spirit had only just formed her primordial spirit, and her primary spirit sword was also just formed. Although he did not know the foundation of this sword, Sword Venerable Taiyin could clearly feel that this sword technique was only just formed, and there was still potential that could be unearthed. As Luo Qingwu's cultivation continued to improve, and her understanding of the great Tao of heaven and earth and her own sword technique became increasingly profound, the power of this primary spirit sword would eventually become stronger and stronger. Chapter 12-13. The sword energy from the immortal heaven primordium sword formation clashed with Luo Qingwu's primary extreme spirit sword. Neither side gave way to the other and kept clashing. Amidst the green light of the sword formation, an aged voice that sounded like the roar of rolling thunder suddenly rang out. "Your sword Tao is very strange." It was Sword Venerable Firmament's voice. His thin body was sitting cross-legged in the air at the core of the sword formation. There was a square black stone in front of him. It was the Primordium Sword Stone. The Primordium Sword Stone was surrounded by a white light. A white jade sword floated silently above the square black stone. Rays of light landed on the white jade sword. The sword was crystal clear and warm, and the tip of the blade was wrapped in light. Rays of light landed on the surface of the black Primordium Sword Stone. The two sides collided, producing the sound of swords being sharpened. The white jade sword emitted an increasingly clear sense of power. It was not an imitation of force or a manifestation of spell. It was as if there really was a world of creation standing there. Wherever the sword pointed, the endless spirit energy of the great thousand worlds seemed to gather toward the sword. The endless spirit energy turned into an invisible blade. The primordium sword stone was still black, but at this moment it flashed with a bright luster as if it was transparent. A figure could be seen sitting inside the primordium sword stone. The figure would change between a human and a sword from time to time. At first glance, it looked like a human figure, but the next moment, it would turn into an ancient sword, and the next moment, it would turn back into a human figure. When it turned into a human figure, it was a young man in black with his eyes closed. It was Chu Yang. When it turned into a sword, it was a treasure left behind by the ancient heavenly gate. It was a creation magic treasure that had yet to be truly refined, the ninth heaven sword. It was once thought to be the most likely sword Tao magic treasure to compete with the immortal heaven sword and even threaten it. Unfortunately, with the destruction of the ancient heavenly gate, it also became a legend. Now, it had a chance to reappear, but it was sealed inside the immortal heaven primordium sword formation and the primordium sword stone. Every time the celestial heaven sword emitted a ray of light that landed on the surface of the grand primordium sword stone, it would become stronger. The grand primordium sword stone refined the incomplete ninth heaven sword and fed its power and essence back to the celestial heaven sword, allowing the celestial heaven sword to continuously improve. Meanwhile, a large amount of power from the immortal platform sword formation was supplied to the immortal heaven sword to help it reappear. Sword Venerable Firmament sat at the center of the immortal heaven primordium sword formation, and most of his energy was focused on recasting the immortal heaven sword and dealing with Sword Venerable Tiangang. However, he quickly discovered that the situation had changed when Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan were fighting against Sword Venerable Taiyin and the others. Even Sword Venerable Firmament frowned when he saw Luo Qingwu's magical powers after reaching the primordial spirit realm. Sword Venerable Firmament already had some understanding of the strength of Xiao Yan, Zhu Yi, Wang Lin, Shi Tianhao, and the others after reaching the primordial spirit realm. At the moment, Luo Qingwu was probably weaker than when they had just formed their primordial spirits during the battle of annihilating the Xianqi. However, as a sword cultivator, her shocking sword principal strength was undoubtedly even more shocking in the eyes of the people from Shushan. For a great sword cultivator like Sword Venerable Firmament, although Luo Qingwu was currently suppressing the others from Shushan, she was still far from being his match. However, when he saw the sword principle of Luo Qingwu's primordial spirit sword, this grand elder of Shushan was in awe. This sword is so strange. This feeling. Her sword seems to be closely connected to her body, but also independent. Her sword is in harmony with heaven and earth, but she is alienated from heaven and earth. What exactly is this? Outside the sword formation, Sword Venerable Big Dipper's attacks became more and more violent. Within the sword formation, Luo Qingwu used the primordial spirit sword to fight against the immortal heaven sword Qi. Zhuge Zhan turned into a rainbow and swept up Luo Qingwu, continuing deeper into the sword formation. Luo Qingwu's sword light turned, like an immortal guiding the way. It broke through the layers of green light and headed straight for where Sword Venerable Firmament, the immortal heaven sword, and the grand primordium sword stone were. Sword Venerable Firmament snorted coldly, and it was as if thunder had exploded on the ground. Previously, I was afraid that I would damage those sword formations and cause the sword chi needed for the recasting of the immortal heaven sword to be insufficient. Now that the recasting ritual has passed the initial stage, there is no need to continue worrying about it. Sword Venerable Firmament formed a sword seal with his left hand and guided it. The ancient sword in his right hand, Firmament, flew up into the vast green light. Sword Venerable Firmament's left hand drew a circle around the grand primordium sword stone. The white light surrounding the grand primordium sword stone continued to expand, and pillars of light shot into the sky. All of you, help me fight against Senior Brother Tiangang. Sword Venerable Firmament tapped the grand primordium sword stone with his finger. It also rose up and merged with the green light. The immortal heaven grand primordium sword formation shone brightly, and strands of white sword chi began to gather in the green light. Then, they rolled up a light mist that swept across the sky and earth. Looking from outside the sword formation, one could see a thick white sword chi gradually poking out from the top of the huge cyan ball of light, blocking the celestial sword galaxy that Celestial Dipper Sword Venerable had chopped down. Sword Venerable Big Dipper was expressionless. Under the guidance of his sword seal, the sword light that resembled the Milky Way continued to slash down. The white sword chi that had just charged out from the green light ball immediately began to disintegrate and shatter. But at the same time, the sky-piercing mountain where the Heavenly Sword Sect was located, the Cloudwalker Peak of the illusory Cloud Mountain where the Celeritas Sword Sect was located, the Infinite Island where the Songhai Sword Sect was located, the formations of the various sword sects all began to shake violently, as if they would shatter at any time. This greatly shocked Sword Venerable Tong Tian, Celerita's swordsman, Emerald Wave swordsmen, and the others who were in charge of the sect guarding formations. They hurriedly activated the power of the formation to defend against this sudden attack. Previously, the sect guarding sword formations of the various sects were mobilized on a large scale, but now they were suddenly attacked. This caused Sword Venerable Tong Tian and the others to be at a loss for a moment, countless suspicions arising in their hearts. The sect guarding formations of the Wilderness Sword Sect, Blaze Sword Sect, and other sects that were relatively weaker were almost shattered in one blow. Sword Venerable Big Dipper, who was currently attacking the Immortal Heaven Grand Primordium Sword Formation, immediately sensed that something was wrong. Although his understanding of the Immortal Heaven Grand Primordium Sword Formation was not as profound as Sword Venerable Tsangming, Sword Venerable Big Dipper had also immersed himself in this sword formation for many years. He immediately reacted and understood what Sword Venerable Tsangming had done. Speaking of which, this was originally one of the uses of the Immortal Heaven Grand Primordium Sword Formation. But at this moment, it caused Sword Venerable Big Dipper to fly into a rage. Sword Venerable Big Dipper immediately changed his sword stance, no longer concentrating on one point. Instead, he spread out his sword essence. Boundless sword light covered the sky and earth, actually directly enveloping the green light ball transformed from the Immortal Heaven Grand Primordium Sword Formation. An incomparably huge sword star directly separated the green light ball from the atmospheric world. Then, like a torrential rain of meteors, thousands of sword lights madly attacked the green light ball. Within the sword formation, Sword Venerable Tsangming had a regretful expression as he shook his head. As expected, it still can't stop Senior Big Dipper. Although he could use the power of the sword formation to direct Sword Venerable Big Dipper's attacks to the mountain gates of the other 8 major sword sects, Sword Venerable Big Dipper's attacks were no longer limited to one point. This greatly reduced the guiding effect of the Immortal Heaven Grand Primordium Sword Formation. Although Sword Venerable Big Dipper's attacks were no longer concentrated, because of this, he was still a great sword cultivator in the Dharma Ending Realm. Sword Venerable Tsangming relied on the power of the Immortal Heaven Grand Primordium Sword Formation and could barely contend with him in terms of pure strength. However, in terms of exquisite sword principle attainments, he was still inferior. If this continued, the Immortal Heaven Grand Primordium Sword Formation would most likely reveal a flaw first. Sword Venerable Tsangming took a deep breath and stood up in the void. However, we've still managed to buy some time. Just this bit of time is enough to determine the outcome of this battle. At this moment, the Immortal Heaven Sword had completely turned into a ball of white light. Silently, it floated in the world of green light formed by the sword formation. Although there was no primordium sword stone and the power of the sword formation to continue tempering it, the power and intent contained in the immortal heaven sword was becoming more and more profound. At this moment, it was as if it was undergoing its final sleep. When it woke up from its long sleep and underwent the final tempering, everything would be clear. The moment of success is coming. Before that, a cold glint flashed in Sword Venerable Tsang Ming's eyes. With a thought, his figure disappeared from the side of the immortal heaven sword. Inside the sword formation, Zhuge Zhan stared at the world of green light in front of him. The pressure from the immortal heaven grand primordium sword formation suddenly disappeared. Seeing that the sword formation had not been stopped and Sword Venerable Big Dipper had not broken through the sword formation, the experienced Zhuge Zhan did not relax. Instead, he became even more vigilant. Luo Qingwu's heart trembled. The voice that suddenly sounded just now belonged to Sword Venerable Tsang Ming. Almost at this moment, an extremely overbearing immortal heaven sword chi that was far more powerful than the previous one shot out from the layers of green light and slashed toward Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan. Zhuge Zhan and Luo Qingwu's expressions became solemn. Zhuge Zhan used a seven-colored rainbow to avoid the immortal heaven sword chi. However, at this moment, the white sword chi cut through the real and fake space-time and continued to attack the two of them. Zhuge Zhan's eyes flashed fiercely. He shook the scorching sun battle spear and pushed the divine sunlight path's magic power to the extreme to meet the immortal heaven sword chi. Luo Qingwu was not careless at all. A dazzling sword light shot out from the center of the Tai Chi diagram formed by her primordial spirit and collided with Zhuge Zhan's scorching sun battle spear. The power of both sides collided violently in the void, stirring up the green light. Endless sword chi scattered between heaven and earth. The Tai Chi diagram formed by Luo Qingwu twisted and trembled slightly in the void. Its surface undulated like the waves of the sea. It did not calm down for a long time. Zhuge Zhan grunted and gritted his teeth as he looked around. After entering the immortal sword formation of primordial beginning, the formation had severely blocked him from receiving the power of the solar star. In the layers of green light in front of the two of them, a skinny old man with a cold expression slowly walked out. It was Sword Venerable Tsang Ming. Sword Venerable Tsang Ming's hands were empty. He formed a sword seal with his left hand, and a green ball of light floated silently on his fingertip. However, there were ripples on the surface of the ball of light, as if it was being attacked from all directions. There were also many fine cracks on the ball of light. However, Sword Venerable Tsang Ming did not care. He only stared coldly at Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan. Then he placed his index and middle fingers together like a sword and gently slashed through the void. Another immortal heaven sword chi immediately appeared and attacked Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan. Chapter 12:14. Even though a considerable part of his energy was still used to take care of the heavenly sword formation of the beginning, Sword Venerable Firmament's true body had descended at this moment. That sharp and all-conquering heavenly sword chi still made Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan feel immense pressure. Unlike the heavenly sword chi that drifted in the sword formation before, they were now facing a grand elder of Shu Mountain who was only one step away from completing the initial tribulations. He was a great sword cultivator who had lived since the Middle Era. Sword Master Firmament stared at Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan. His right hand formed a sword seal, and he stabbed out with his sword. The vast expanse of white immortal heaven sword energy seemed like a gentle breeze and drizzling rain, but it was indestructible. When the sword fell, it seemed to have completely sealed off the surrounding space, forcing Luo Qingwu and Luo Qingwu to have nowhere to hide and could only face it head-on. Luo Qingwu's divine sense and dermic powers were astonishing, far beyond that of ordinary primordial spirit embodiment stage cultivators. Zhuge Zhan was also a top expert of the Dao integration stage and was fierce in battle. When the two of them joined forces, They dissolved the heavenly sword chi one after another. However, Sword Master Firmament's attacks seemed endless. Luo Qingwu responded calmly and joined forces with Zhuge Zhan to fend off the attacks. Even though they were at a disadvantage against Sword Venerable Firmament, Luo Qingwu's sword way magic became smoother and smoother in the process of fighting with him. Faced with Sword Master Firmament's pressure, Luo Qingwu, who had just formed her primordial spirit, grew rapidly. Not only did her companion, Zhuge Zhan's eyes lit up, but even Sword Master Firmament frowned slightly, a look of admiration appearing in his eyes. You're really a good seedling for the Sword Dao. When I first formed my primordial spirit, I wasn't as capable as you. Sword Master Firmament's tone was calm, and his voice was like rolling thunder. As he spoke, his attacks became more and more urgent. Unfortunately, I don't have time to sharpen my sword with you. My sect's heavenly sword is about to be reborn, and I won't allow you to cause trouble. Swordsman Firmament used his finger as a sword, and the momentum of his sword changed abruptly. The white celestial sword chi streaked across the void and changed its shape abruptly, turning into a sky that seemed to cover the vault of heaven, falling toward Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan. The overwhelming sword light looked similar to the layers of green light in the immortal heaven grand beginning sword formation. It was also omnipresent and omnipresent. The sword light was like the world itself, difficult to dodge and difficult to resist. However, the power of the immortal heaven primordium sword formation was not only used to resist Sword Venerable Tiangang, but also most of its power was used by Sword Venerable Firmament to fight against Sword Venerable Tiangang and refine the immortal heaven sword. Back then, the pressure the sword formation exerted on Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan was far less than when Sword Venerable Firmament personally executed the Green Destiny Sword Escape. Just like Sword Venerable Big Dipper's Sky, Sword Galaxy, and Xian Longxing's Great Thousand Sword Realm, this was a powerful Sword Dao executed by Sword Venerable Firmament on the basis of his heavenly immortal sword Qi and his understanding of the Sword Dao and the Great Dao of heaven and earth. Wherever the sword light went, heaven and earth were covered. A beam of light pierced the sky, connecting heaven and earth. As the light flashed, all the space between heaven and earth seemed to collapse in an instant. Heaven and earth merged together, killing everything in the world. Zhuge Zhan shouted in a low voice, "I'll do it horizontally, you do it vertically." Luo Qingwu immediately understood what he meant. Without any hesitation, the sword light Tai Chi diagram formed by her primordial spirit immediately turned, and the sword light of the primary spirit sword turned into a beam of dazzling light, shooting straight out. Zhuge Zhan manifested his divine light of the Sun Wei fruit. The scorching sun battle spear swept across the void, shattering the divine light of the Sun Wei fruit. It was as if a small sun had appeared in the void. In the dazzling light, the scorching sun battle spear swept across the sky. The sun seemed to have exploded, and endless light was added to the scorching sun battle spear. As Zhuge Zhan waved the spear across the sky, suddenly a golden stream of light swept across the sky, like a golden wave. This golden stream of light and the sword light of Luo Qingwu's primary spirit soared crisscrossed between heaven and earth. They stood side by side, forming a huge cross. Under the control of Zhuge Zhan and Luo Qingwu, this huge cross suddenly stood up in the midst of the collapsing heaven and earth. A mysterious and powerful force had already forcefully stabilized the heaven and earth that seemed to be about to mend together, and forcibly resisted the green destiny sword escape of Sword Venerable Firmament. Swordsman Songming was expressionless as he shook his head. Although he had reconstructed his heart of the sword, there was still a gap between him and his peak in the past. At this moment, he did not have the ancient sword Songming in his hand. Otherwise, even if he could not have one immediately, that attack just now would have injured Zhuge Zhan and Luo Qingwu. However, Swordsman Songming's state of mind did not waver at all. After that attack, he immediately used the Green Destiny Sword Escape, which was extremely domineering. Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan could only continue to defend and could not counterattack. Swordsman Songming's attack was too sharp. Their counterattack might be effective, but it would be more dangerous for them. Defending for a long time was bound to result in losses, especially when the enemy was a great sword cultivator with sharp attacks. Moreover, Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan did not specialize in defense. The two of them were also looking for an opportunity to counterattack, but Swordsman Songming was not in a hurry to win. After sealing off Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan's retreat, he began to attack steadily. His gaze fell on the green ball of light on the tip of his left hand. He saw that there were more and more cracks on the surface of the ball of light. This indicated that the heavenly immortal sword formation would soon be broken by Swordsman Tiangang from the outside. However, a faint smile appeared on Swordsman Songming's face because he could clearly feel that the white ball of light formed by the heavenly immortal sword in the center of the sword formation was slowly shrinking. The reforging of the heavenly immortal sword was also about to be completed. Swordsman Songming took a deep breath and thought, in this case, I only need to use the ninth heaven sword remnant and the grand primordium sword stone. Just as he was thinking about this, his expression suddenly changed. Within the heavenly immortal sword formation, a square black stone suddenly appeared amidst the green light and white mist, and a large amount of light flashed within it. The seemingly endless sword light flashed together and shot out from within the grand primordium sword stone. The square black stone seemed to be transparent at this moment, and a figure was sitting cross-legged within it. Above his head, the light of a huge sword floated. Light flowed on the sword blade as if all the Daos in the world had gathered together. Around this huge sword, there were 9 blood-colored swords revolving around it. Those blood-colored swords did not look very sharp, but they were extremely evil. That figure was Chu Yang. Under the heaven and earth avatar above his head, there was another, slightly smaller light figure. It looked like a youth around 15 or 16 years old. His facial features were similar to Chu Yang's, but it was his yuanying. What was even more eye-catching was the fact that Chu Yang's figure was blurry and indistinct. Shockingly, he was also a ball of light that was constantly changing between human and sword form. At this moment, Chu Yang had completely lost his physical body. Only his spirit and yuanying were left. His current expression was calm and full of determination, but it also contained a bit of open-mindedness. Chu Yang's yuanying moved his hands together and then pointed at his spirit below. His spirit gradually lost its human form and turned into an ancient sword. His spirit power was completely integrated into the sword. Meanwhile, his yuanying suddenly shook. Large amounts of sword chi and sword intent from the surrounding heavenly immortal sword formation began to gather towards the grand primordium sword stone. Then, they surged into it and landed on Chu Yang's yuanying. Almost in an instant, Chu Yang's yuanying and heaven and earth avatar were riddled with holes. However, the ancient sword that seemed to be both real and illusory at the same time had a vigorous sword intent. Although it seemed illusory and unreal, the powerful concept of 10,000 Daos forming one sword, 10,000 Dharma forming one sword, 10,000 Dharma forming one sword, 10,000 Dharma forming one sword, and 10,000 Daos forming one sword did not seem to be inferior to the heavenly immortal sword at all. Although the ancient sword was still not physical, its radiance became brighter and brighter. It engulfed Chu Yang's yuanying and heaven and earth avatar. Then, it turned into a dazzling stream of light and continuously shuttled through the grand primordium sword stone, trying to break out of its seal. Seeing this, Sword Venerable Firmament's eyes flashed. How can I let a little thing like you spoil my plans? The ninth heaven sword is indeed extraordinary, but in the end, it has not been forged. With that, Sword Venerable Firmament temporarily gave up on Zhuge Zhan and Luo Qingwu and pointed at the grand primordium sword stone. As the green light condensed, the grand primordium sword stone's vibrations immediately calmed down. The ancient swords in the 4 black stones gradually dimmed. Chu Yang's physical body and spirit had already been destroyed. Only his Yuanying and heaven and earth avatar were gradually withering. However, Chu Yang's expression was calm and unperturbed. Affected by this, the grand primordium sword stone temporarily separated from the heavenly immortal Taichu sword formation. The entire sword formation immediately shook. Sword Venerable Tiangang, who was outside the formation, immediately sensed the change. The huge sword star suddenly shrank and collapsed toward the center. Endless sword light and sword intent pressed against the heavenly immortal Taichu sword formation. The world formed by the green light was filled with cracks and was on the verge of collapse. It was as if it would shatter at any time. Sword Venerable Firmament's expression became serious. Finally, he pointed at the sky again. Within the sword formation, the white light disappeared and a white jade sword appeared. As soon as this sword appeared, Luo Qingwu, Zhuge Zhan, and even Chu Yang, who was trapped in the grand primordium sword stone, felt the pressure increase tremendously. Although it had not reached the terrifying power of the heavenly fairy sword, it was enough to make everyone present feel pressured. Following Sword Venerable Firmament's method, the heavenly fairy sword, which had yet to be completely reforged, gradually fused with the layers of green light within the heavenly immortal Taichu sword formation. The color of the sword light instantly changed and became pure white. When the green light dissipated, there was only a vast expanse of whiteness between the heavens and the earth. It was like clouds that kept swirling, isolating Sword Venerable Tiangong's attack. At this moment, the white jade sword replaced the grand primordium sword stone and became the dominant force of the entire sword formation. Without the grand primordium sword stone as a medium, the sword chief and the various sword sects formations began to return to their original forms. They turned into thunder, fire, sea, starlight, and other different forces that surged within the vast expanse of white heavenly fairy sword chi. However, these forces still could not escape the heavenly immortal Taichu sword formation. Under the guidance of the heavenly fairy sword, they continued to attack Sword Venerable Tiangang. Sword Venerable Tiangong's eyes were like torches as he looked at the white jade sword in the sword formation. Even though he was usually calm, his expression was complicated and his heart was in turmoil. Sword Venerable Firmament reached out to grab the grand primordium sword stone. After the heavenly fairy sword completed its final refinement, it landed on the grand primordium sword stone and the sword shadow of the ninth heaven sword. However, Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan clearly understood this, so they immediately switched from defense to offense. Although their cultivation levels were lower than Sword Venerable Firmament's, their attacks could not be underestimated. Sword Venerable Firmament snorted coldly and could only stop. He turned around and used the green Destiny Sword Escape to block Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan's attacks. With this delay, the immortal Taichu sword stone shook again, and a dazzling sword light shot out. After all, this treasure was not the sect returning scabbard. Without the support of Sword Venerable Firmament and the heavenly immortal Taichu sword formation, it could not lock the ninth heaven sword shadow for long. As the sword light flashed, the ninth heaven sword shadow actually rushed out with Chu Yang. Chapter 12:15. The ninth heaven sword transformed into a treasure light. The moment it rushed out of the primordium sword stone, the celestial heaven sword in the center of the sword formation let out a soft hum. This hum caused the entire world formed by the immortal heaven sword formation to tremble slightly. Even Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper, who was outside the sword formation, felt it. Inside the sword formation, Sword Venerable Firmament forced Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan back. With a turn of his body, he blocked the ninth heaven sword's path. An array of green light enveloped him. Under the pressure of the green light, Chu Yang grunted from within the ninth heaven sword. The ancient sword light trembled continuously, and specks of light seemed to appear within it. Sword Venerable Firmament actually wanted to use his own sword intent to forcefully kill Chu Yang's Yuanying through the ninth heaven sword. At this moment, Chu Yang had completely fused with the ninth heaven sword. Their connection was unprecedentedly close. If Sword Venerable Firmament destroyed his nascent soul, it would also cause damage to the ninth heaven sword. However, he couldn't care less at this moment. Although he didn't know that it was Xiao Yin who would come, after seeing Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan, he also knew that Xianmin Tianzong would most likely send more experts over. To him, time was of the essence. Previously, the change in the ninth heaven sword shadow had already caused great waves in the reforging of the celestial heaven sword. But at the same time, Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan had already attacked again. As the sword light flashed above Luo Qingwu's Taiji diagram, the sword intent realm within it suddenly changed. The sword light of the primary extreme spirit sword disappeared, and another powerful sword intent was revealed. Many techniques and great Daos kept gathering and fusing into the sword. When the sword fell, it was as if the great Daos of heaven were sending down divine punishment. It was the direct lineage technique of the ancient heavenly sect's great Jiotian sword. Sword Venerable Firmament's eyes flashed, and he immediately knew that things were bad. He sensed that the ninth heaven sword's sword shadow within the primordium sword stone he had sealed was vibrating even more violently, resonating with Luo Qingwu's great Jiotian sword. At this moment, the surrounding void trembled, and the great Daos of heaven and earth seemed to be vaguely stirring as well. However, what shocked Sword Venerate Firmament even more was that Sword Venerate Heavenly Dipper had suddenly changed his strategy outside the immortal grand primordium sword formation. He was no longer attacking blindly, but had started to permeate the sword formation with his immortal heavenly sword chi. In terms of understanding and mastery of the heavenly immortal primordium beginning sword array, Sword Venerable Firmament was superior to Sword Venerable Astral Dipper. However, Sword Venerable Astral Dipper's cultivation realm was higher. If Sword Venerable Firmament was careless, it was possible for Sword Venerable Astral Dipper to seize control of the sword array. At a time like this, Sword Venerable Firmament could only grit his teeth and stabilize the heavenly immortal primordium sword formation. Meanwhile, the primordium sword stone was suppressing the ninth heaven sword and fighting against Luo Qingwu, Zhuge Zhan, and the others. Hence, he could only adopt a defensive stance and hope to temporarily suppress the ninth heaven sword shadow within the primordium sword stone. The two sides were in a stalemate for a while, but Sword Venerable Firmament had already started to gradually stabilize the sword formation. The white jade sword within the sword formation drew endless immortal heavenly sword chi, continuously drawing sword chi spiritual power from the other sword sects, and started to block Sword Venerate Heavenly Dipper's footsteps once again. However, at this moment, Sword Venerable Firmament, Luo Qingwu, and Zhuge Zhan all felt a determined will from the primordium sword stone that was being sealed. In that instant, the ninth heaven sword shadow seemed to solidify. A large amount of light surged from within, and a figure shot up into the sky from the sword light. It was Chu Yang. His physical body and spirit had been completely destroyed, and his Yuanying and universal Dharma forms were also heavily injured. However, at this critical juncture of life and death, it was as if all the dust on his body had been removed from his body, and he was like a sharp sword that had been unsheathed, shining brightly. Chu Yang had never felt that the great Tao of heaven and earth was so close to him, as if it was within his reach. However, at the same time, the abyss of death was close at hand, and he felt as if he was between the nine heavens and the yellow springs. That wonderful feeling caused his mind to be filled with distracting thoughts, but there was a spiritual light that stood before him like an eternal stairway that led to the clouds. Silently stood there, and everything would no longer be the same once he pushed open that door. At this moment, Chu Yang suddenly abandoned all the thoughts in his mind, as if he had been freed from heavy shackles. Relying only on the spirit in his heart, he resolutely charged towards that door. His Yuanying and universal Dharma forms merged, turning into a stream of light that kept rising. During this process, the light kept trembling and scattering, as if it would collapse and disintegrate at any time. A layer of understanding rose in Chu Yang's heart. I've comprehended enough, and I can successfully push that door open. However, my current state is too weak. When I push that door open, my body will completely collapse and die, and I won't be able to attain the primordial soul realm. Although he understood this, Chu Yang did not stop. Instead, he continued to launch that hopeless and resolute attack, concentrating all of his willpower into it without wavering. At this moment, the sword light of the ninth heaven sword suddenly dimmed, and the material-like blade instantly turned into a sword shadow once again, merging with the stream of light that Chu Yang had transformed into. A rumble sounded in Chu Yang's consciousness. He had finally broken through that primordial soul door. In the unseen world, the mysterious great Tao of heaven and earth resonated in his ears. The stream of light that his body had transformed into broke through the void, turning into talismans that underwent the baptism of the great Tao of heaven and earth. It was pitch black in front of him. This was the world within the primordial sword stone, but at this moment, there were also many concepts that were accepted and absorbed by Chu Yang and the ninth heaven sword. Bastard! Sword Lord Firmament's reprimanding voice resounded throughout the entire world of darkness, echoing like rolling thunder for a long time. The heavenly immortal sword Qi was born to kill Chu Yang within the primordial sword stone. A large amount of sword light suddenly lit up in the sky of talismans that Chu Yang had transformed into. It was as if the great Tao of heaven and earth were resonating together. The sword light gathered together and transformed into an ancient sword again, colliding with the heavenly immortal sword Qi that was attacking. The ancient sword shadow dimmed and was forced back, but the heavenly immortal sword Qi was also stopped. The countless talismans that flickered with sword light suddenly gathered at this moment, turning into a simple long sword with light patterns flowing on the surface of the blade. The ninth heaven sword's sword shadow descended and merged with the long sword. The long sword gently vibrated, letting out a distant and resonant sword chime. There seemed to be someone softly chanting in the sword chime. The world changes, the earth and dust, the white clouds and the gray dogs. The dream is real. The road of the heart is long, but I move forward. The heavenly river is far away, and the sword shocks the gods. Although it had merged with the sword shadow of the ninth heaven sword, the sword light seemed to contain a large number of unique concepts. It was similar to the major Jiuqian divine sword of the past, but it was also different. It was filled with a mysterious concept of power. As sword cultivators, Sword Lord Firmament and Luo Qingwu felt their hearts flutter. Am I getting old, or have times changed? I actually saw two top geniuses of the sword principle in a row in one day. Sword Lord Firmament's eyes were cold, but the pressure from Sword Lord Tiangang outside was increasing, firmly restraining the power of the heavenly, immortal Taichu sword formation. Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan's attacks did not stop. The sword intent in the primordial sword stone surged, and under the combined efforts of the three experts, a sword light finally broke through the shackles of the primordial sword stone. As the sword light flowed, the appearance of the long sword was revealed. It was a broadsword that was 9 feet and 9 inches long and 6 inches wide. The surface of the blade was engraved with golden inscriptions, and there were even blood-red and white patterns on the inscriptions. A mysterious radiance flowed continuously on the sword, and it was as blue as water, like the heavenly river. Sword Lord Firmament and Luo Qingwu's eyes flashed at the same time. The primordial spirit formed by the ancient heavenly gates, great Jiuqian divine sword principle, should be a sword that is 9 feet long and 9 inches wide. There are also differences in its appearance and characteristics. One of the ancient heavenly gates' 9 treasures, the Dharma treasure Song Tiandao, Jin, formed by the great Jiutian divine sword principle, was roughly the appearance of the primordial spirit formed by the ancient heavenly gates, great Jiutian divine sword principle. The ancient sword spun in the void and once again transformed into the appearance of a black-robed youth. It was Chu Yang. Chu Yang stepped in the void, his expression as if he was in a trance. His eyes alternated between light and dark, constantly changing before slowly returning to calmness. It was unclear whether it was his previous life or a dream. Once upon a time, he acted willfully, and his emotions were at his heart. He was resolute and stubborn, and his eyes could only see what he wanted to see. In that moment, when he seemed to have woken up from a dream, he swore to protect everything that he had once lost. The resolute youth of the past was no longer there. What replaced him was a person who endured and restrained his own likes and dislikes, who did not show his emotions, and who plotted deeply. In this world, there were too many experts, and his sect beyond Heaven Mountain was too weak. Even if it did not perish under Wu Qingrou's schemes, or in the conflict between the Great Zhou dynasty and Shushan, it could still be destroyed by the other great powers at any time. As time passed, the development of the situation was gradually different from what he remembered. However, Chu Yang still carefully plotted, helping his sect to tread on thin ice, and finally reaching this day. He was originally a person who showed off his abilities, a person who was quick to repay favors and take revenge. However, in order to protect his sect and home, he had suppressed his romantic nature. He could not indulge himself, and he could not be happy. Even though the sky was high and the sea was wide before him, he was willing to bind himself to this small space. It was only in that moment that Chu Yang truly cast aside everything and wholeheartedly focused on breaking through to the primordial soul stage. All his schemes and hesitations were thrown to the back of his mind. Now that he had finally reached the primordial soul stage, he had taken a step past the bottleneck that all living beings dreamed of and obtained immortality. Even in Chu Yang's memories, he had never been able to reach such a position. This unprecedented display of power caused him to feel both marvelous and elated. However, after a moment of carefree happiness, Chu Yang's state of mind calmed down once more. It was as if a peerless divine sword had flashed for a brief moment before returning to its scabbard. Everything in the past, to me, was never a shackle. It was the most precious thing to me. Chu Yang smiled slightly. All my hard work, including attaining the primordial soul stage and continuing to advance in the future, is also that I will not lose this most precious thing. My master, my sect, and Chu Yang did not look in Luo Qingwu's direction. He raised his head to the sky and let out a clear roar. The primordial soul incarnation that he had just cultivated shed its human form, once again turning into a 9 feet 9 inches long golden ancient sword. Blood-red patterns and white patterns intertwined, and with a flash of azure sword light, he attacked Sword Lord Firmament alongside Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan. Chapter 12:16. Chu Yang's primordial spirit avatar unfolded in the void, and the golden ancient sword let out a soft hum. Then it suddenly split into 9 streams of light. The 9 streams of sword light flashed and surged towards Swordsman Firmament like 9 bright heavenly rivers. As the light flickered, the great Tao of heaven and earth manifested within them. Above the 9 heavenly rivers, there were all kinds of strange phenomena. Some of the rivers had a golden blazing sun, some had layers of dark shadows, and some had a huge furnace rising on the surface of the water. There were many strange phenomena, and so on. The 9 heavenly rivers suddenly merged into one in the sky, and the great Tao returned to one path. The bright heavenly rivers shone brightly, like the light of water and the light of a sword. What caught Swordsman Firmament's attention was that a faint blood-red color appeared in the heavenly rivers, and there were even white clouds lingering above it. The white clouds seemed to be somewhat similar to the heavenly immortal sword Qi of the Shushan sword sect. Luo Qingwu and Zhuge Zhan also attacked Swordsman Firmament at this moment. Outside the heavenly immortal primordium sword formation, Swordsman Astral Dipper's attacks also became more and more urgent. Swordsman Firmament's old face was filled with coldness at this moment. He snorted heavily, and it was as if thunder had exploded on the ground. Chu Yang and the Ninth Heaven Sword had already escaped from the Grand Primordium Sword Stone, so Swordsman Firmament no longer suppressed them. With a wave of his hand, he directly sent the Grand Primordium Sword Stone into the core of the sword formation and merged with the Heavenly Immortal Sword. Although the Heavenly Immortal Sword had not been completely reforged, and the Heavenly Immortal Primordium Sword formation was still incomplete, the Heavenly Immortal Sword, the Grand Primordium Sword Stone, and the power of the 9 major sword sects sword formation had already been gathered. Under Swordsman Firmament's control, the power of the sword formation was immediately unleashed to its current peak. The sword was a weapon of slaughter. Although the Heavenly Immortal Sword Chi could be used for defense, its sharpest point was still its offense. In the blink of an eye, the Heavenly Immortal Primordium Sword formation switched from defense to offense. Under the control of the Heavenly Immortal Sword, it attacked Swordsman Astral Dipper. The ball of light formed by the sword formation suddenly dispersed and disappeared. The white Heavenly Immortal Sword Chi broke through the boundaries of the world, causing the entire vast thousand realms to gather. It was as if the entire world had turned into a giant sword that slashed towards Swordsman Astral Dipper. Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper was expressionless as he waved his Celestial Dipper sword and counterattacked with a swift and fierce sword art. The Heavenly Celestial Primordium Sword formation completely gave up on its defensive power and stopped maintaining the sword realm. It activated the power of the 9 major sword sects Mountain Gate formation and attacked Sword Venerable Tiangang with all its might. Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper flicked his ancient Celestial Dipper sword with a finger, and a deep echo immediately sounded from the sword. The sword cry was not clear and distant, but deep and heavy, as if the stars in the sky had exploded. His sword fell, and the heavenly sword of the galaxy rolled back like mercury spilling onto the ground. The void of the vast thousand realms where Shushan was located continued to shatter, accompanied by the galaxy that was completely formed from sword light rolling down. He was completely unafraid of the might of the heavenly sword formation of primordial beginning, and he fought attack with attack. Sword Venerable Firmament suddenly sighed. If possible, I really don't want to do this, but Senior Brother Tiangang, no one can stop the immortal heavenly sword from being reforged here and now. As he stood guard, he flipped his palm, and a stream of light suddenly flew up into the sky. The light was not strong, but after merging with the heavenly celestial primordium sword formation, the entire sword formation seemed to be covered in a layer of hazy light. The light was hard to describe, but it was mysterious, powerful, and unfathomable. The light merged with the sword formation, and the power of the sword formation suddenly spread out. The sky was filled with sword light, and it blocked Sword Venerable Tiangang. Sword Venerable Tiangang's eyes burst with astonishing brilliance as he stared at the heavenly celestial primordium sword formation. His gaze seemed to pass through the sword formation and fall straight on Sword Venerable Firmament. The heavenly celestial primordium sword formation no longer isolated space, and Chu Yang, Luo Qingwu, Zhuge Zhan, and the others could see the light of day again. Zhuge Zhan could also unobstructed access to the power of the solar star. However, the three of them did not feel relaxed because of this. Luo Qingwu looked at the sword formation that flashed with mysterious light in the sky and thought, after the Battle of Shushan, Taishu Temple's Grand Supreme Elder, Lord Yin, went to Shushan. After that, Taishu Temple's Sword Dao integrated the Shushan Sword Sect's Heavenly Immortal Sword Chi True Legacy. From the looks of it now, the exchange between the two sides was deeper than expected. This light is clearly Taishu Temple's all-encompassing Taishu Mystic Light. Even in Taishu Temple, only a few of the most powerful cultivators can cultivate this light. The others, including the many members of the Council of Grand Supreme Elders, are unable to use it. This light that was bestowed to Shushan Sword Sect was probably not easy to obtain. The cultivators of Taishu Temple seem to have never seen a treasure light refined into a crystal and stored for future use. It's so precious. No wonder it could be exchanged for heavenly immortal sword Qi. Luo Qingwu's eyes flashed. However, this light seems to be different from the Taishu Temple's expert that master saw in the light and shadow traces. After all, Luo Qingwu's cultivation level was still limited. She only had a superficial understanding of the all-encompassing Taishu mystic light. Her knowledge was limited. Although she felt that there was a difference, it was difficult to distinguish. However, she had a vague feeling that it was different from the heavenly immortal sword Qi that Taishu Temple could study. Although she might not be able to cultivate it completely, she could absorb nutrients from it to nourish her own sword Dao. The all-encompassing Taishu mystic light that Shushan had obtained would probably be much more difficult to study. After the Battle of Shushan, Shushan was weak, while Taishu Temple was strong. Such a difference was expected. Before Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper left Shushan for infinite wilderness, he did not take this light with him. He left it on Shushan, and it ended up in Sword Venerable Firmament's hands. However, Sword Venerable Firmament could not be bothered to study the light slowly now. He directly added it to the heavenly immortal Taichu sword array. Using the power of Taishu Temple to fight against Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper made Sword Venerable Firmament feel depressed. However, at this critical moment, he could no longer care so much. He activated the power of the sword array to fight against Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper. Meanwhile, Sword Venerable Firmament raised his left hand high. A beam of sword light continued to guide the heavenly immortal Taichu sword array, activating the power of the sword array to fight against Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper. Meanwhile, his right hand stretched out to the side and opened his palm. A majestic beam of sword light descended from the sky like a heavenly pillar. Sword Qi and sword will expanded in all directions. It was as grand as the sky, covering the sky. An ancient bronze sword appeared in Sword Venerable Firmament's hand. He waved it gently, and the surrounding heaven and earth shook as if it was being split apart. It was the ancient sword Firmament. Sword Venerable Firmament stared at Chu Yang, Luo Qingwu, and Zhuge. He said coldly, "How can I let you ruin the grand occasion of our sect's resurgence?" As he spoke, he executed the green destiny sword escape. With this strike, a green sword light covered the sky. It was as if the sky was collapsing, enveloping Chu Yang and the other two. At this moment, the void between heaven and earth seemed to no longer exist, as if it was about to collapse. Sword Venerable Firmament executed this strike with the ancient sword, Firmament. Its might was much stronger than before. With a swing of the sword, heaven and earth changed. The ancient sword, Firmament, was a Dharma treasure at the peak of the Mahayana realm. It was comparable to a Tao integration realm expert. In the hands of Sword Venerable Firmament, who was a great sword cultivator at the first tribulation stage, its might was even more extraordinary. The power of both sides combined and created each other. It was as if it had the power to split heaven and earth. Even with the combined strength of Chu Yang, Luo Qingwu, and Zhuge, it was difficult for them to withstand it. Chu Yang grunted. The ancient sword formed by his primordial spirit trembled violently. Suddenly, a sword shadow appeared in the sword light. The sword shadow seemed illusory, but for an instant, it turned from illusory to solid. It was at this moment that it met Sword Venerable Firmament's green destiny sword escape. When the two sides collided, the collapsing heaven and earth suddenly stopped. Then, the horizon distorted and shattered. After the collision, the sword turned from solid back into an illusory shadow and flew back into Chu Yang's primordial spirit. With this delay, Luo Qingwu and Zhuge used the old method again. One of them moved vertically, while the other moved horizontally. They intertwined and broke through the world of green light that seemed like it was about to close up. Chu Yang secretly gritted his teeth. The ninth heaven sword is not complete yet. It's not convenient for me to deal with this old man. Sword Venerable Firmament formed a sword seal with his left hand. Under the guidance of his sword intent, the heavenly immortal primordium sword formation transferred the pressure of Sword Venerable Firmament's attack to the protective formations of the other sword sections. Almost in an instant, a few of the weaker sword formations were almost completely crushed. Meanwhile, the power of these sword formations was absorbed by the heavenly immortal primordium sword formation and fused with it. After being tempered by the primordium sword stone, the original appearance of the blazing fire, thunder, and starlight were all turned into white heavenly immortal sword chi. Under the guidance of the heavenly immortal sword, it attacked Sword Venerable Firmament. I'll deal with you guys first. Then, I'll slowly deal with Senior Brother Firmament. Sword Venerable Firmament looked coldly at Chu Yang. Although you have formed your primordial spirit, to me, you're just a piece of iron that hasn't matured yet. Not to mention sharpness, you're not even a sword embryo. The sword shadow of the ninth heaven sword is still fused with your primordial spirit. I'll now use your primordial spirit and sword shadow to refine my sex heavenly immortal sword. The effect will only be better than before. He turned to Luo Qingwu with a cold gaze. Xianmen Tianzong is indeed extraordinary. Apart from your master's heaven-punishing sword, you have another sword principle. However, you're still not your master. You're the same as that brat with the ninth heaven sword. You're just a piece of iron now. If you want to become a real sword, you're still far from it. Even after the heavenly immortal sword was reforged, I had no intention of immediately becoming enemies with you, Xianmen Tianzong. However, since you're trying to stop my heavenly immortal sword's rebirth, I have no choice but to be ruthless and kill all of you here. Sword Sovereign Firmament's voice reverberated across the heavens and earth like thunder. His seemingly thin and small body contained boundless power. As he spoke, he swung his sword again. A green light immediately enveloped the sky again and slashed at Chu Yang, Luo Qingwu, and Zhuge Zhan. Who did you say you wanted to kill just now? However, at this moment, a voice suddenly rang out from the void. A valiant young man in purple robes and black robes suddenly appeared in front of Luo Qingwu. He looked at Sword Sovereign Firmament with a sneer before extending a palm forward. A red light suddenly flashed in his palm. An earth-shattering roar that didn't sound like a living thing could be heard. Chapter 12:17. Seeing this youth in purple with a heroic appearance, Luo Qingwu immediately called out, "Senior Martial Brother Xiaoyan." The person who came was the eldest disciple of the Xianmen Tianzong sect leader, Xiaoyan, who had been guarding Kunlun Mountain. A red light flashed in his palm, and an extremely violent aura was emitted from it. It was extremely ferocious and evil, shocking the world. As the red light flashed, it was as if an endless calamity was about to descend on the human world. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. That berserk aura of destruction was something that even Sword Venerable Firmament felt fearful upon seeing. Even though the strength was limited, the ferocious energy concept within was something that Sword Venerable Firmament had never seen in his life other than when he faced Lin Feng's heaven-punishing sword. It was as if the entire world of creation was about to be destroyed by the endless calamity. As the red light flashed in Xiaoyan's palm, he pushed his palm forward, blocking the path of Sword Venerable Firmament's green destiny sword. The red light and the green light collided at this moment. The moment they collided, there was a bluish-purple demonic fire in the red light, a thread-like black hurricane, a dim yellow springs true water, and countless natural disasters and earthly calamities surged together. They gathered together to form a violent and despair-inducing calamity force, completely destroying the heaven and earth formed by the green sword light. Although the red light was also slashed apart by the green sword light, it quickly gathered again. Sword Venerable Firmament stared at Xiaoyan's palm in astonishment. That seems to be the power of the Netherworld Sea. But it's darker, more condensed, and more ferocious. What exactly is... Xiaoyan first turned to look at Luo Qingwu and smiled. Congratulations on attaining the primordial spirit, junior sister. After fourth junior sister, Junior sister has also successfully attained the primordial spirit. Our sect has another joyous occasion. He then looked at Zhuge Zhan and Chu Yang and nodded. Mr. Zhuge, fellow Taoist Chu, both of you have worked hard as well. Congratulations to fellow Taoist Chu for achieving the primordial spirit stage. After speaking, Xiao Yan's gaze turned back to Sword Venerable Firmament. He looked at Sword Venerable Firmament and sneered, I originally thought that between you and Sword Venerable Firmament, one would stay behind and the other would attack. But from the looks of it now, it's not the case at all. Sword Venerable Firmament stared at Xiao Yan as his expression turned much more solemn. There's someone in the Taishu Temple who can draw upon the power of the Netherworld Sea. Could it be that this lad can do it as well? If that's the case, although this child is young, he will be a formidable opponent. Many thoughts flashed through Sword Venerate Firmament's mind. He did not slow down at all as he swung the Firmament sword at Xiao Yan. At the tip of the ancient greenish-bronze sword, a green ball of light appeared. It was only the size of a fist, but it seemed to be a world of its own. It was Sword Venerate Firmament's Firmament Immortal Sword True Fruit. As Sword Venerate Firmament lightly tapped the Firmament Immortal Sword True Fruit in his hand, the green Firmament Immortal Sword True Fruit turned into a ray of green light, instantly splitting the world and piercing towards Xiao Yan. Unlike the previous attack that seemed to be able to heal the world and turn it into a flat surface, Sword Venerate Firmament's attack seemed to be able to make the flat surface disappear, turning the entire world into a line. The powerful force caused even Xiao Yan's expression to turn serious. However, he still had a sneer on his face as the red light in the palm of his right hand became increasingly dazzling. Within the red light, there seemed to be the sound of thousands of calamities whistling at the same time. The violent force seemed to be able to destroy the world. The green and red lights clashed together. The red light was penetrated by the green light and continuously melted. It was difficult for it to gather again, but the green light was also continuously shattering and could not be maintained. The world that had turned into a line in the midst of violent tremors unfolded once again and turned into a flat surface. Then the boundary between the heavens and the earth was once again separated. However, in the process, the world formed by the green sword light also continued to shatter and turn into nothingness, gradually ceasing to exist. Xiao Yan withdrew his right palm and raised his eyebrows slightly. Before the war between the two worlds started, he had been staying in the Netherworld Sea, carefully studying and comprehending the power of the Netherworld Sea and the power of the Netherworld Sea, which was why he had today's harvest. Now, he could also break the boundary of the Netherworld Sea, but the battlefield was in the Divine Land. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he did not want to guide the power of the Netherworld Sea to the Divine Land. That would turn the human world within a radius of tens of thousands of miles into wasteland. Unlike Wu Mengqi from the Taishu Temple, or Taoist Yu Ming and the others from back then, Xiao Yan, who had a closer connection with the heavenly calamity, could guide a portion of the power of the heavenly calamity to strengthen himself. Although it was not as violent as directly guiding the power of the Netherworld Sea, it was enough for him to face a top sword cultivator like Venerable Swordsman Firmament and not be at a disadvantage. Venerable Swordsman Firmament stared closely at Xiao Yan. Slowly, the ancient sword in his hand, Firmament, swung in the void, and his voice exploded like thunder between heaven and earth. Unexpected, unexpected. Xianmin Tianzong, other than Zhu Yi, who has the creation treasure, the Golden Permitha Bridge, you have also obtained such a great opportunity. Such a great creation. Could it be that the heavens are really looking out for you? Xianmin Tianzong? He let out a long breath. Today is the day that the sword of the immortal sky of Shushan reappears. With the help of heaven and earth, no one can stop it. Although your strength has exceeded this old man's expectations, don't even think of ruining the great affairs of Shushan. Xiao Yan looked at Venerable Swordsman Firmament and suddenly smiled. He tilted his head slightly and said to Luo Qingwu, who had transformed back into her human form from the sword light Taiji diagram behind him. Little junior sister, do you know? When I look at him, I suddenly remember a story that Master told me in the past. That was when we had just joined the sect, and Master had brought us to travel the world. Apart from traveling and cultivating, Master would tell us about the various interesting things that he had seen while he was roaming the heavens. Although some of these things happened in the mortal world, I still felt that they were very interesting when I listened to them. I remember that when you had just joined the sect and were still young, you had pestered me and little junior brother to tell you many things. Luo Qingwu's eyes flashed slightly. Senior brother Xiaoyan, are you referring to... Xiaoyan turned his head and looked at Venerable Swordsman Firmament again. There was still a slight smile on his face, but it was clearly extremely cold. Venerable Swordsman Firmament frowned, and Xiaoyan said with a sneer, Venerable Swordsman Firmament, I had thought that as an elder of the human race, you would definitely have a brilliant move when you reappeared during the war between the two worlds. I never expected you to do such a crude thing. I've always known about your life. You were born in the Middle Epoch, but you did not even take part in the war between the two worlds. It's normal for you to guard the sect of Shushan, but what are you doing now? Look at Sword Sovereign Tiangang, who came from the same sect as you. It was because he fought with all his heart and soul and fought a bloody battle in Heaven Wasteland domain that your Mount Shu regained its reputation. It was also because of this that the other great sword sects put down their old grudges during the war between the two worlds and trusted you to build the Nine Heavens Primordium sword formation. Although I was born late, I still know about the matters of Shushan. In the past, the founder of Shushan, Ren Changmei, created the heavenly sword Qi with a grand will that could split the heavens and the earth. He wanted to create a new world for the sword principles of the world, so he was known as the ancestor of the world swords. But after that, he discovered that he could use the power of the heavenly sword Qi to spread across the world and absorb thousands of other sword principles to nourish the heavenly sword of Shushan. From then on, he fell into a deep slumber and walked on a different path. Because on this path, every time the heavenly sword was damaged or even destroyed, it could be quickly reborn. It was not until my master killed it with the heaven punishment sword that the chance of self-rebirth was cut off. Xiaoyan raised his eyebrows. For so many years, it seemed that Shushan had taken advantage of it, but in fact, you neglected the essentials. The sword ancestor himself forgot, and so did you. The original true meaning of the heavenly sword Qi of Shushan was to split the heavens and the earth, to keep forging ahead and creating swords. But in the end, it turned into one sword into 10,000 swords, and 10,000 swords nourished one sword. Since then, you have been stuck in the old ways. The most powerful person in the history of your Shushan sword sect was your founding ancestor, sword ancestor Ren Changmei. Back then, his sword principle and dharma power were world-shaking, but he stopped at the dharma-ending realm and could not advance any further. Among your successors, not to mention surpassing the sword ancestor, there was no one who could reach the height of the sword ancestor in the past. Have you never thought about the reason? Perhaps Ren Changmei himself did not realize it, or perhaps he realized it, but he was hesitating between the desire to control the sword intent in the world and the desire to set things right. Before he could make a decision, he died at the hands of Jihuang Xinyuan, so he no longer had a chance. Now is the time for your Shushan to be rebuilt, but you ignore it and still want to go back. How stupid! Xiaoyan's voice resounded through the heavens. Sword Venerable Tiangang, who was fighting with the heavenly sword and the heavenly sword of Primordium, was silent. Sword Venerable Firmament's face turned as black as iron. How old are you? How much do you know about sword principles? How much do you know about history? How dare you talk about our ancestral master and the path of our sect? If your master Lin Feng's heaven-crushing sword did not break my heavenly sword, how could it have the power it has today? How could Taishu Temple not dare to provoke us? How could it intimidate the demons of planet Tianhuang? How dare a brat like you spout nonsense in front of this old man? If my heavenly sword had broken your Xianmen Tianzong's heaven-crushing sword, my sex sword would definitely have reached a higher level and broken the shackles of the past. You, Xianmin Tianzong, humiliated Xu Shan, and only then could you rise to the top today. How dare you speak so shamelessly here? Shut up, shameless old thief. Don't you know that everyone in the world is willing to eat your flesh raw? How dare you talk nonsense here? Xiao Yin said sternly. Our two sects, the battle between the heavenly sword and the heavenly sword, relied on our own abilities. Even if there were schemes, it was decided to have a dignified battle. How could you be as treacherous as you are today, almost swindling us and stuffing your own pockets? The other major sword sects let go of their former enmity for the sake of fighting against the demons, and because of Sword Venerable Tiangang and the others' bravery, they trusted Xu Shan. Not only did you betray the trust of the other sword sects, but you also betrayed your own sect, letting their blood flow like water. If Sword Venerable Tiangang had not been injured in the bloody battle with Tianlong Kuan, do you think you could have stopped him so easily? If you can't see the true path that Xu Shan's sword should take, you should just hide your head and meditate on Tao. How dare you call yourself destiny here? White-haired old thief, you have lived in vain for tens of thousands of years and have not achieved anything in your life. You only know how to wag your tongue and do dirty things in secret. A dog with a broken back still dares to bark madly in this place. I have never seen such a shameless person. Chapter 12:18. Xiao Yan's roar reverberated throughout the world. Sword Venerable Firmament stared at Xiao Yan with an unprecedentedly cold expression. That scrawny old man stood in the void like the eye of a storm, exuding an aura that could cause one's heart to palpitate. Sword Venerable Firmament's face was as dark as water. He swung the ancient sword in his hand and immediately used the green destiny sword escape to charge toward Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan laughed loudly and extended his right palm forward. Red light flashed in his palm, and an extremely ferocious aura leaked out. The world seemed to be in turmoil at this moment. The ferocious netherworld sea, separated by endless space, seemed to be very close. At this moment, it opened its eyes and stared at Sword Venerable Firmament. In the netherworld sea that was filled with thousands of calamities, there were scarlet lights constantly surging. They seemed to want to gather together and form a huge pillar. At this moment, a portion of these scarlet lights were activated and turned into rolling waves. They shuttled through the world space and gathered in Xiao Yan's palm. Sword Venerable Firmament stared at Xiao Yan. Being scolded by Xiao Yan in public made his heart burn with anger. He did not know how many years it had been since he had suffered such humiliation. If it was under other circumstances, Sword Venerable Firmament would not be so angry. But what Xiao Yan said was not only a negation of all of Sword Venerable Firmament's previous efforts, it was also a negation of Xu Shan's sword sect's founding ancestor, Sword Ancestor Renchangmei, all the way from the past generations of Xu Shan's sword sect. It was even a negation of the Xu Shan sword sect's belief from the ancient era until now. After experiencing the confusion and chaos of the Battle of Xu Shan, Sword Venerable Firmament, who had reconstructed his heart of the sword and established his path, was willing to risk universal condemnation and even detain the current sect leader, Jiwen Rui, to fight with another senior of Xu Shan, Sword Venerable Tiangang, who had known him for tens of thousands of years. It was hard for outsiders to know how many times he had struggled with this. In this kind of situation, no matter how calm and open-minded he was also angered by Xiao Yan to the point of ascending to the heavens. However, he was ultimately a great sword cultivator who had achieved Tao in the Middle Epoch. Although he had not participated in the war between the two worlds like Sword Venerable Tiangang, he was equally experienced in fights of magical powers. His anger and other negative emotions quickly disappeared, but the cold, killing intent in Sword Venerable Firmament's eyes almost solidified. Anger and other negative emotions quickly disappeared, but the cold, killing intent in Sword Venerable Firmament's eyes almost solidified. Under the activation of the firmament immortal sword true fruit, the green destiny sword escape was unleashed. The sword aura blotted out the sky and covered the earth as it charged toward Xiaoyan. That terrifying aura caused Chu Yang, Luo Qingwu, Zhu Vijan, and the others behind Xiao Yin to tremble. Sword Venerable Firmament stared coldly at Xiao Yin and thought to himself, when the people of Taishu Temple activate the power of the Netherworld Sea, they will directly break open a crack in the Netherworld Sea, causing the calamity of the Netherworld Sea to descend upon the vast thousand worlds. When used by Tao Integration Realm cultivators, the power of their magical powers is comparable to experts of the Dharma Ending Realm. Sword Venerable Firmament stared coldly at Xiao Yin and thought to himself, when the people of Taishu Temple activate the power of the Netherworld Sea, they will directly break open a crack in the Netherworld Sea, causing the calamity of the Netherworld Sea to descend upon the vast thousand worlds. When used by Tao Integration Realm cultivators, the power of their magical powers is comparable to that of experts of the Dharma Ending Realm. This person is at the primordial divinity transformation realm, and his magical powers are powerful enough to compete with Tao Integration Realm cultivators. However, the strange power of the red light he activates has not reached the level of the Dharma Ending Realm. But he did not break open a crack in the Netherworld Sea. Is it because he can't do it and can't withstand the pressure of the Netherworld Sea? Or is it because this is divine land that he didn't go all out? It's just that his red light is very strange. Compared to the people of Taishu Temple who have to directly break open a crack in the Netherworld Sea, there are many more changes. Xiao Yin stared at Sword Venerable Firmament and said to Luo Qingwu and the others without turning his head, "Little junior sister, Mr. Zhuge, fellow Chu, the three of you step back." As the red light flickered on his right hand, he blocked Sword Venerable Firmament's attack, while his left palm spread out beside him. He spread his 5 fingers apart, and blazing flames instantly appeared on his 5 fingers. What made everyone shudder with fear was that the 5 balls of blazing flames were all different. They were extremely righteous, extremely young, and extremely pure, like the origin of all flames. The milky white flames were the pure, young, true fire. As dazzling as the sun, the flames were like needle-like, pure golden flames. That was the true sun fire. The flames were condensed and flickered with red and blue lights. However, the flames themselves were golden flames. That was the Nanmingli fire. The vast and heavy green flames that seemed to have condensed into a solid form were like the earth. That was the Ksitigarbha true flame. The red flames that bloomed like lotuses and seemed to want to send people into the cycle of reincarnation were the red lotus karmic fire. The 5 types of top-notch, true fire gathered together. Just by appearing together, they instantly burned through the surrounding void. Silently, Xiaoyan said, "My mystique and spiritual power are too violent. If I explode here, the divine land will be affected and suffer great damage. It will be difficult to transform and recover for a long time. It's no less than the Netherworld Sea splitting open and the baptism of the great tides. It's still not too late if you stop now. Otherwise, Shushan will be destroyed." Sword Venerable Firmament was so angry that he laughed. Today, the immortal heaven will not reappear. Shushan will also enter the eternal night, unable to see the light. What's the point of dragging out our feeble existence? No one can stop the revival of the immortal heaven. After saying that, Sword Venerable Firmament attacked Xiao Yin with his sword. Seeing this, Xiao Yin smiled coldly. "If it were any other time, I would play with you slowly. However, today's situation is special. Let's be more decisive." After saying that, he closed the 5 fingers of his left hand and made a hand seal. The 5 types of true fire gathered and fused on his left hand. The towering fire disappeared almost instantly, and a strange lotus appeared on Xiao Yan's left hand. The bottom layer of the lotus was green like a lotus leaf. The top layer was red and dazzling. The top layer was pure gold and flashed with a piercing light. The top layer was milky white like a lotus. There were two golden stamens swaying in the wind, flashing red and blue respectively. When this lotus appeared, even Sword Venerable Firmament frowned slightly. He could feel an extreme destructive power from it. Such a powerful power had already surpassed the limits of a Tao Integration Realm cultivator. Even a great sword cultivator like Sword Venerable Firmament, who was undergoing tribulation, had to treat it seriously. As Xiao Yan's mystique and spiritual power continued to increase, apart from becoming more and more familiar with the control of the Sky Flaming Lotus, he could even use the five-colored Fire Lotus with ease. The power of the Sky Flaming Lotus had also increased greatly. Even a Tao Integration Realm cultivator would not be able to escape if his Sky Flaming Lotus was hit by it. They would very likely be killed by it. This attack was enough to threaten the safety of a cultivator in the first tribulation stage. However, Sword Venerable Firmament was not afraid of it. He knew that although this mystique of Xiao Yan's was extremely violent and contained an extremely strong Tao extermination power, it was also because of this that Xiao Yan could only use the five-colored Fire Lotus once with his current Primordial Spirit Embodiment Realm. Primordial Spirit Embodiment Realm cultivators were one with heaven and earth. They could absorb the spirit chi of heaven and earth at any time and had almost unlimited dermic powers. However, when Xiao Yan used the five-colored Fire Lotus now, it would hurt his primordial spirit. Furthermore, it would be difficult for him to recover in a short period of time. As a result, he would fall into a state of exhaustion after using the five-colored Fire Lotus. Tao Integration Realm cultivators, or even experts like Great Sage Xiang Lu and Ning Wanga, who had just undergone tribulation, would most likely not be able to withstand Xiao Yan's attack. However, given Sword Venerable Firmament's cultivation level, it was not a problem. However, what made Sword Venerable Firmament fearful was that Xiao Yan's right hand had also drawn upon the power of the heavenly calamity. Even Sword Venerable Firmament was under immense pressure from both sides. He took a deep breath and directly threw the ancient Sword Venerable Firmament into the air. Then, he activated the Firmament Immortal Sword True Fruit and strengthened it. Finally, his entire body flew into the sky. His primordial spirit turned into a beam of green light and integrated into the ancient Sword Venerable Firmament. The ancient Sword Venerable Firmament flashed in the void and instantly disappeared. Sword Venerable Firmament, who had activated the power of his sword Tao Mystique to the extreme with his primordial spirit, flashed in the void and attacked Xiao Yan. In the world formed by the green sword light, heaven and earth closed and collapsed into a flat surface. The boundary of the flat surface disappeared and condensed into a line. And this line of light also disappeared in a flash. Everything collapsed into a tiny dot. The world was destroyed, and only this dot existed. This that seemed to completely ignore the distance and the void and the passage of time. The moment it appeared, it had already arrived in front of Xiao Yan. This that was only seen when it came into contact with the heavenly calamity's red light, causing the dazzling red light to continuously collapse and disintegrate. Xiao Yan believed that if it was not for the heavenly calamity's light blocking it, this would have directly appeared on his primordial spirit and broken it. This sword strike was the strongest attack that Sword Venerable Firmament could unleash by activating the ancient Sword Venerable Firmament. In this attack, Sword Venerable Firmament had returned to his peak state before his sword heart was broken. He displayed the absolute offensive power of a Sword Tao expert who was only a step away from the Dharma-ending realm. In this instant, the pure, explosive power of this sword strike could almost rival that of a Dharma-ending realm almighty cultivator. And at this moment, the Sky Fire Lotus in Xiao Yan's left hand and the heavenly calamity's light in his right hand suddenly fused together. Then he pointed at the green light that Sword Venerable Firmament had transformed into. Without a sound, a piece of the void was suddenly missing. Everything in the world was annihilated, leaving behind only chaos. That small green dot suddenly expanded in an instant. It turned into a line, and then expanded into a flat surface. Then it reappeared in the world. However, the world of green light immediately began to shatter. As the green light danced, endless raging flames and the red light that filled the sky continued to spread in the world. They swept through everything in their surroundings. Other than the area that was enveloped by the heavenly immortal sword formation, everything in the world was destroyed. If Luo Qingwu, Chu Yang, and Zhu Guizhan had not received Xiao Yan's warning and retreated in advance, they would not have been able to escape from this storm. Without any protection, the peaks of Shushan collapsed on a large scale. If not for the fact that the people of Shushan had all been drawn into the sword formation by Sword Venerable Firmament, they would definitely have been annihilated by the shockwaves. The world of green light shattered, and the ancient Sword Venerable Firmament reappeared. Under the bombardment of the endless raging flames and ferocious red light, Sword Venerable Firmament's primordial spirit was forcefully shaken out of the ancient Sword Venerable Firmament. Under such a violent collision, even Sword Venerable Firmament was injured. However, he laughed loudly and forcefully suppressed his injuries. With a wave of his right hand, the ancient Sword Venerable Firmament reappeared in his hand. Then, he attacked Xiao Yan once again. Chapter 1219. Xiao Yan's previous attack had combined the power of the five-colored fiery lotus and the power of the heavenly calamity. Even a cultivator at the initial tribulation stage would not be able to withstand the violent power. Sword Venerable Firmament had also been severely injured in that clash. If Sword Venerable Firmament had not pushed his strength to the limit, he would have been even more injured in that clash. Although the ancient Sword Venerable Firmament was powerful, fine cracks had appeared on the surface of the sword. If Sword Venerable Firmament had not placed his primordial spirit in the sword, the ancient Sword Venerable Firmament would have been destroyed by Xiao Yan. However, Xiao Yan's situation was even worse. His dermic power and aura dimmed uncontrollably. Although the five-colored fiery lotus was powerful, the pressure was also great and would cause damage to his primordial spirit. He did not use the nether evil flame and the mysterious heavenly tribulation flame, the two most violent and unstable true fires, to fuse with the fiery lotus. This allowed him to activate the firmament fiery lotus more quickly, and he would not be completely exhausted. However, his divine powers and dermic powers were inevitably at a low ebb. Even the power of the heavenly calamity was not as strong as he wished. The red light of the heavenly calamity also gradually dimmed. Since he was not in his best condition, it became extremely difficult for him to break through the crack in the netherworld sea. Sword Venerable Firmament, who was fighting with Xiao Yan, naturally sensed all of this immediately. As he laughed, he forcefully suppressed his injuries and mustered his remaining courage to continue attacking Xiao Yan. Green sword light flashed continuously, piercing through the void and attacking Xiao Yan like a storm. Junior, it's commendable for you to have such strength as a primordial spirit incarnation realm cultivator. However, you're still far from being able to stop my immortal heaven from reappearing. Almost everyone knew the strengths and weaknesses of Xiao Yan's firmament fiery lotus. Although Sword Venerable Firmament had been trapped in Shushan for a long time, he was also well aware of this. Xiao Yan's ultimate attack could not do anything to him. Now, he was at his mercy. Part of Sword Venerable Firmament's attention was focused on the heavenly immortal primordium sword formation fighting Sword Venerable Tiangang. At the same time, he was also paying attention to Chu Yang, Luo Qingwu, and Zhu Guizhan. Right now, even though he had the confidence to kill Xiao Yan, who had fallen into a trough, he himself was also injured. If Luo Qingwu and the other two attacked now, they might not be able to do anything to him, but if he wanted to kill Xiao Yan, it would also be difficult. Sword Venerate Firmament felt an uneasy feeling in his heart. The source of this feeling is Xiao Yan in front of him. This causes him to not hesitate at all, wanting to kill the threat as soon as possible. Xiao Yan's expression was a little ashen, but his expression was calm, his gaze focused and calm. He calmly mobilized his remaining mana and did his best to gather heaven's calamity's power to protect himself, countering every move that came his way, blocking Sword Venerable Firmament's attack. That ferocious red radiance lit up once again, blocking Sword Venerable Firmament's green sword light. However, this red light became more and more violent, gradually revealing a chaotic and unstable state. In Xiao Yan's current state, it was already too much for him to control the power of Heaven's Bane as he wished. If he forced it, he would lose control of the power. Sword Venerable Firmament's attacks became more and more urgent. His eyes were shrewd and ruthless, and he could see where Xiao Yan's problem lay. As long as he maintained enough pressure, Xiao Yan would be forced to forcibly draw upon the power of heavenly calamity, and the result of losing control of the power would be that Xiao Yan himself would be the first to be devoured by that fierce and overbearing red light. Although the situation was becoming more and more advantageous to him, the feeling of unease in Sword Exalt Firmament's heart was becoming more and more intense. If this kid had only utilized this strange energy from the beginning and used other methods to deal with me, then even if it would be difficult for him to defeat me, he might not necessarily lose, and the situation might even fall into a stalemate. Why does he want to dig his own grave? Sword Exalt Firmament's eyes narrowed into slits as a cold light surged ceaselessly within them. The stalemate was actually advantageous to Xiao Yan. Sword Exalt Firmament's energy was being held up by Xiao Yan, and Sword Exalt Firmament could not be distracted. On the other side, Sword Exalt Firmament would gradually gain the upper hand against the heavenly immortal primordium sword formation. The heavenly immortal sword had yet to completely return to perfection, and the sword formation did not have Sword Exalt Firmament presiding over it. In the end, he would not be able to hold off a great sword cultivator like Sword Exalt Firmament for long. In fact, Sword Exalt Firmament might even be able to seize control of the heavenly immortal primordium sword formation in the end. In Sword Exalt Firmament's eyes, Xiao Yan's eagerness to end the battle with a single strike was extremely abnormal. Other than Xiao Yan overestimating himself and advancing rashly, he could not find any other reason. However, Sword Exalt Firmament's intuition told him that although Xiao Yan was upright, he was not such a reckless and unwise person. With this thought in mind, Sword Exalt Firmament's sword shook, and he once again activated his Firmament Immortal Sword True Fruit to strengthen the ancient sword firmament. Then, he once again executed the Primordial Spirit sword projection technique, pushing his strength to the extreme. He first blocked the attacks of Luo Qingwu, Chu Yang, and Zhuge Zhan with his sword. Then, he immediately turned around and swung his sword. The sword and man became one, turning into a boundless green light that covered the sky and earth as it attacked Xiao Yan. The green light world collapsed into a line and fiercely slashed down at Xiao Yan. The red light around Xiao Yan flickered continuously, blocking Sword Exalt Firmament's sword. However, the red light that was enduring Sword Exalt Firmament's fierce attack gradually started to lose control. The originally abnormally ferocious light no longer obeyed Xiao Yan's orders and focused solely on defense. Instead, it started to attack Sword Exalt Firmament. What put Xiao Yan in even more danger was that the red light was not only attacking outwards, but it was also attacking internally, endangering Xiao Yan's safety. The line of green light started to return to its original state under the violent attacks of the red light, no longer condensing. Sword Exalt Firmament and the ancient sword firmament were also continuously enduring its attacks. However, after losing the protection of the red light, Xiao Yan, who was suffering from the red light's backlash and Sword Exalt Firmament's powerful attacks, was in an even more precarious situation. It looked like he was about to die here. Xiao Yan let out a long roar, and his primordial spirit instantly shed its human form, turning into a Taiji diagram of flames. The 7 great true fires turned into many small flames, together forming a huge Taiji diagram that covered the sky. The colorful flames were divided into yin and yang, spinning continuously in the world. However, they had lost their previous vitality and brilliance, appearing extremely weak. Suddenly, beams of golden light surged out from the Taiji diagram, covering the entire Taiji diagram. The light soared into the sky, isolating the red light from the heavenly calamity's backlash, and soared exalt firmament's sword light. Countless inscriptions were carved into the void within the thick golden pillar of light, giving off a profound concept of power. When Sword Exalt Firmament saw this golden pillar of light, he could not help but be stunned. God's Descent Treasure Protecting Light. The Taishu Temple's God's Descent Golden Elixir? In the instant that the God's Descent Treasure Protecting Light appeared, Xiaoyan stabilized the power of heavenly calamity that had gone out of control. He then reduced its power, returning it to his control once more. The red light gathered once more, merging with the golden God's Descent Treasure Protecting Light to resist Sword Exalt Firmament's attack together. Sword Exalt Firmament returned to his senses and snorted coldly. So what if it's the God's Descent Treasure Protecting Light? His attacks became even more urgent. Although the power of heavenly calamity helped him defend once more, the golden God's Descent Treasure Protecting Light was still being worn down rapidly. Under Sword Exalt Firmament's attacks, the golden God's Descent Treasure Protecting Light gradually disappeared. As for Xiaoyan's power of heavenly calamity, he did not strengthen it. As a result, the red light was gradually being broken through by the green light. Beams of green sword light began to pierce through the red light, landing on the Taiji diagram formed by Xiaoyan's Yuan Shun, truly injuring Xiaoyan's Yuan Shun. The flames were extinguished one after another, and many scars appeared on the Taiji diagram, tearing out cracks and gaps. As if forced to, the ferocious red light formed by the power of heavenly calamity around the Taiji diagram finally grew stronger once more. However, as the red light resisted Sword Exalt Firmament's attacks, it gradually lost control and became chaotic once more. However, a long sigh came from the Taiji diagram formed by Xiaoyan's Yuan Shun. It's just as Master said. I need a whetstone that can bring me a crisis of life and death. It can help me speed up my comprehension of the profundities of heavenly calamity, as well as help me completely discern my future path. In the netherworld sea that only Xiaoyan could see, the red light grew denser and denser in the gloomy world that was filled with calamities and tribulations. Although it had yet to return to its previous appearance as the heavenly calamity stone, it was gradually beginning to take shape. Although this incomparably ferocious creation treasure was not as resolute as the heaven-exterminating sword, it was similarly filled with the power to destroy the world, as if it wanted to bring calamity and destruction to the great thousand worlds. However, it itself contained the power of creation and unique concepts. In the process of reforming its form, it once again evolved the process of achieving creation and the great Tao. Before the war between the two worlds, Xiaoyan had remained in the netherworld sea. Apart from communicating with the power of heavenly calamity and the netherworld sea, he had been observing the process and comprehending the principles within. At the same time as these principles and concepts unceasingly verified Xiao Yan's own comprehension of cultivating the Yin and Yang returning origin sutra, they also gradually cleared away the fog in front of Xiaoyan, revealing a clear path. However, Xiaoyan's cultivation and comprehension had gradually reached a bottleneck, and he had yet to take that final step. At this moment, the path before him was finally completely clear. Xiaoyan had officially stepped into this brand new world before him. Amidst the long howl, specks of light suddenly flickered in the center of the Taiji diagram formed by Xiaoyan's Yuan Shun. They seemed dim, but they grew brighter. It was as if sparks had suddenly shot out from a pile of fire that had been completely burnt out before reigniting once more. The sparks instantly turned into a prairie fire. The entire Taiji diagram seemed to have regained its luster at this moment. The flames surged into the sky, sweeping away the dejected and weak aura from before. It grew more and more vigorous and violent. Sword Venerable Firmament's heart sank as he stared fixedly at Xiao Yan's Yuan Shan. With his understanding and experience of the Tao of heaven and earth, he quickly understood the changes in the dermic power and aura of Xiao Yan's Yuan Shan, the power of the Tao of life. Furthermore, it's the power of the Tao of life that far surpasses the ordinary and is rarely seen in the world. Cultivators of his realm have never seen the power of the Tao of life. As Xiao Yan's Yuan Shan regained its vigor, the power of heavenly calamity that it triggered also grew abruptly, completely blocking off Sword Venerable Firmament's attack. However, what was even more terrifying was that a flaming lotus was condensing on the Taiji diagram. Milky white, pure gold, bluish purple, green, and black. The 5 colors represented the pure yang true fire, extreme yang true fire, nether evil flame, Ksitigarbha true fire, and mysterious heaven tribulation flame, respectively. This was a fiery lotus that was even more domineering and powerful than the 5-colored fiery lotus that Xiao Yan had activated for the first time. The power of annihilation and destruction contained within it caused Sword Venerable Firmament's heart to turn cold. A long howl resounded from the Taiji diagram, the birth and destruction of the Tao, the incessant fire, incinerating the heavens and destroying the earth, surviving the calamity. Amidst the howl, the terrifying fiery lotus flew out and struck towards Sword Venerable Firmament. Raging flames soared into the sky and tore the blue sky apart. Chapter 12:20. It was not the life and death of a single living being, but the life and death of the great Tao. The Taiji diagram formed by Xiao Yan's primordial spirit revealed a power that shocked even Sword Venerable Firmament. His attack was completely blocked by the red halo formed by the power of the heavenly calamity, while Xiao Yan's firmament, flaming lotus, attacked him without holding back. The terrifying power contained in the raging flames destroyed the world formed by the green sword light. At the same time, it also damaged Sword Venerable Firmament's heavenly immortal sword Qi and the firmament immortal sword True Fruit. Sword Venerable Firmament could clearly sense the destructive intent that was expanding along with the raging flames. A large number of light inscriptions appeared on the surface of the ancient sword firmament. These light inscriptions seemed to have become fuel for the flames and were incinerated. Sword Venerable Firmament's primordial spirit also had a large number of light inscriptions that were incinerated by the raging flames. This great Shushan sword cultivator, who had attained the Tao since the Middle Epoch, suddenly felt that his consciousness was a little blurry. It was as if many things were leaving him. Everything that had happened in the blink of an eye seemed extremely long and torturous. However, amidst this torment, he deeply felt the ever-changing, irreversible, and irresistible despair. "Don't be arrogant, you brat!" Sword Venerable Firmament roared and pointed at the heavenly immortal primordium sword formation with his left hand. At this moment, he could no longer care about Sword Venerable Tianyang. He only wanted to activate the heavenly immortal primordium sword formation and kill Xiao Yan together with him. However, as he pointed, he realized that the heavenly immortal primordium sword formation was being held back by Sword Venerable Tianyang and could not descend. In the sky, the heavenly void mystic light that was supporting the heavenly immortal primordium sword formation had been completely worn down by Sword Venerable Tianyang. The sword formation was also gradually being suppressed by Sword Venerable Tianyang. Sword Venerable Tianyang pursed his lips tightly. His consciousness reverberated in the heavens and earth. "Firmament, stop! Ice and coal cannot be placed in the same furnace. Tianyang, there's nothing much to talk about between us. The hard work of our Shushan ancestors and the tens of thousands of years of bitter cultivation have all been for naught? Nonsense." Sword Venerable Firmament's voice was like rolling thunder. "Even if I die today, I will kill this brat. If Xianmin Tianzong want to step on Mount Shu to rise, they will have to pay the price." Sword Venerable Firmament's left hand changed into a sword seal as he used all his might to jab a finger at the immortal grand beginning sword array. At that moment, the sword array came to a sudden stop. The sword chi and sword will that filled the sky seemed to freeze at this moment. At this moment, the mountain guarding formations of the other 8 major sword sects suddenly calmed down. It was as if nothing had happened, causing thunderous sword venerable, celestial sword venerable, and the others to feel puzzled. Sword sovereign celestial dipper, who was standing in front of the immortal foundation sword formation, had a slight change in his expression. His divine sense rippled through the air. Song Ming, you've gone mad. His sky sword galaxy couldn't care less anymore. It spun in the void and descended rapidly towards the immortal sky grand beginning sword formation. When the Big Dipper sword venerates sword light came into contact with the immortal sky primordium sword formation, the immortal sky primordium sword formation suddenly moved. This movement was earth-shattering. It was as if the surrounding heaven and earth were trembling because of it. A ray of light suddenly shot out from the immortal sky grand beginning sword formation, causing the surrounding clouds to move. At the center of the light was a white jade longsword. It was the heavenly immortal sword. The heavenly immortal sword shook in the air and released a ray of flowing light that swept the people of Shu Mountain into the distance. Meanwhile, it flew down towards sword venerable firmament. The other treasure in the sword formation, the primordium sword stone, suddenly exploded. The square-shaped black stone transformed into countless streams of light and shot out in all directions. The few major sword formations that were supplying the immortal sky grand beginning sword formation also went berserk at this moment. All the sword chi was drawn to Shu Mountain in a desperate and crazy manner. The Celestial Sword Sect, the Thunderous Sword Sect, and the Songhai Sword Sect could still hold on, but the Celeritas Sword Sect, the Constellation Sword Sect, the Sun and Moon Sword Sect, the Blaze Sword Sect, the Wilderness Sword Sect, and the Immortal Sky Grand beginning sword formation collapsed at the same time. With the Primordium Sword Stone as the lead, the Majestic Sword Chi and Sword Essence all burst out at this moment. The terrifying power that erupted in that instant caused Sword Venerable Heavenly Dipper to have no choice but to stop. However, what made his heart sink even more was that Sword Venerable Firmament had extended his left hand at this moment, caught the Immortal Heaven Sword, and then slashed it toward Xiao Yin. Although it was not complete, the Heavenly Immortal Sword's power was terrifying. Boundless sword chi spread out and finally protected the seriously injured Sword Venerable Firmament. Sword Venerable Firmament grabbed the Heavenly Immortal Sword with his left hand and endured the violent bombardment of the raging flames. His target was Xiao Yin, and he would not stop until he was dead. The flaming Tai Chi diagram formed by Xiao Yan's primordial spirit seemed to have a figure standing proudly in the sea of flames, staring coldly at Sword Venerable Firmament. If you want to fight to the death, then let's fight to the death. Let's see who dies first. As Xiao Yin shouted in a low voice, the flames that formed the Tai Chi diagram, which had dimmed and weakened due to the second firmament fire lotus, became bright again. Countless broken light patterns appeared above the Tai Chi diagram. Then, under the illumination of the flames, they became whole again. Countless new light patterns and talismans were continuously condensed. The surging red light around Xiao Yan's primordial spirit surged and became more and more condensed. It actually formed an illusory light figure in the air. The scarlet light figure was like a huge stone pillar that could support the heavens and the earth. However, this pillar of red light that looked like a pillar that could support the heavens not only made people unable to feel at ease, but also made their hearts palpitate even more uneasily. It made them feel danger and fear. Although this red light pillar was illusory, its appearance and the intent it contained were clearly similar to the extremely vicious creation Dharma treasure, the heavenly calamity in the netherworld sea. Sword Venerable Firmament's heavenly immortal sword pierced the scarlet light pillar that looked like the heavenly calamity. The sharp edge of the sword seemed to cause the entire world to transform into sharp swords to attack together. The white, jade-like sword forcefully pierced into the scarlet light pillar and slowly advanced. However, Sword Venerable Firmament's pupils contracted violently. Although the heavenly immortal sword had reappeared in the world, it was not completely complete and could not compare to the might of a true creation Dharma treasure. Sword Venerable Firmament himself was also an arrow at the end of its flight and could not pierce through the power projection of the heavenly calamity in one strike. Although the heavenly calamity's sword edge was constantly breaking through the obstruction of the scarlet light pillar and was getting closer and closer to Xiao Yan's primordial spirit, in Sword Venerable Firmament's eyes, it was so close yet so far. At the same time that the power projection of the heavenly calamity condensed into a scarlet light pillar, Xiao Yan's third five-colored fire lotus also silently appeared in the void. The raging flames from before had not completely dissipated and were still spreading between heaven and earth, destroying everything it came into contact with. An even more ferocious and domineering flame exploded once again. At the same time that it triggered a terrifying calamity, the raging flames from before gathered once more and erupted together. The power was like the tide, wave after wave, lasting for a long time without end. Sword Venerable Firmament let out a furious roar and ignored the raging flames as he urged the heavenly immortal sword forward with all his might. He stabbed at Xiao Yan, wanted to perish together with him. The flaming Taiji diagram formed by Xiao Yan's primordial spirit continuously circulated in the void, and the dim flames became bright once more. The scarlet light pillar formed by the power of the heavenly calamity suddenly erupted with a ferocious power, turning defense into offense as it swept toward the heavenly immortal sword and Sword Venerable Firmament. The power of the heavenly calamity and the raging flames intertwined inside and outside, adding an earth-shattering might to Sword Venerable Firmament and the heavenly immortal sword. Sword Venerable Firmament was already heavily injured, and his spirit began to shatter. However, what made him even more furious was that a crack had suddenly appeared on the flawless white blade of the immortal heaven sword under the intense distortion of the two great powers. "No!" Sword Venerable Firmament roared angrily. The tip of the heavenly immortal sword could not withstand the enormous pressure and broke apart. Almost at the same time, all the thoughts in Sword Venerable Firmament's mind came to an abrupt halt. His primordial spirit was completely destroyed, engulfed by the roaring sea of fire and red light. Luo Qingwu, Chu Yang, and Zhuge Zhan also retreated far away, looking solemnly at the world that had completely turned into a world of flames. Sword Venerable Tiangong's deep sigh rang out in the void. The explosion of the heavenly sword formation and the intertwining of the raging flames had caused the vast 1,000 domains of the Divine Land to be damaged at this moment. The original location of Shu Mountain had already been reduced to nothing, forming a domain of destruction. Within the boundless raging flames, a figure gradually appeared and slowly walked out of the sea of fire. Dressed in black and purple robes, he was tall and valiant. It was Xiao Yan. At this moment, there were still sporadic flames floating around his body, but they were not burning on his body. Instead, they were only circling around him. As Xiao Yan walked, he nonchalantly reached out to extinguish the flames on his body. His expression was cold and calm. As he strolled through the raging flames, he was like an emperor who had walked out of fiery hell. And within the boundless raging flames, Sword Venerable Firmament's figure was already nowhere to be seen. Sword Venerable Tiangang and Xiao Yan looked at each other in silence. He put away the ancient sword Heavenly Dipper and raised his palm towards the sky. A figure flew out of the sea of fire, but it was dim and lightless at this moment. It was a long sword that looked like white jade. It was the heavenly immortal sword. But what was shocking was that the tip of the white jade sword had been broken, and it was nowhere to be seen. This once unparalleled sword in the world had been reforged. Before it could be completely completed, It had suffered another heavy blow and broken once again under the combined attack of Xiao Yin and Tianyi. And the ancient sword Heavenly Dipper, which was once known as the ancient sword Heavenly Dipper in sword Venerable Tiangong's hand, was already severely damaged. Together with sword Venerable Firmament, it had been completely destroyed. In this battle, Xiao Yin had forcibly killed a great sword cultivator who was only one step away from the Dharma ending realm. Sword Venerable Firmament, the Grand Elder of Mount Shu, had even broken the reforged Heavenly Immortal Sword. Although the Heavenly Immortal Sword was still a long way from becoming a Dharma treasure, it was still far from being comparable to a Mahayana realm Dharma treasure. If Xiao Yan's accomplishments were spread, it would definitely shock the entire Great Heaven world. After Wang Lin and Zhu Yi, Xiao Yan had also successfully taken this crucial step. Not only had he completely identified the direction of his future cultivation path, but he had also advanced towards the center of the stage of the Great Heaven world. Sword Venerable Tiangang looked at Xiao Yan in silence. Xiao Yan stood calmly in the void and also did not speak. There was no sound between heaven and earth. Only the remaining raging flames continued to burn. Chapter 12:21. Xiao Yin and Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper looked at each other. Neither of them spoke, and the situation fell into silence. By comprehending the opposing power of the Great Tao, Xiao Yin could alleviate the injuries caused by using the celestial fiery lotus and the power of the Tao of destruction. However, with the repeated injuries, even the power of the Tao of life would need time to heal. At this moment, he still had the strength to fight, but his mystique and dermic power would inevitably be greatly weakened. As for the injuries caused by the backlash of the heavenly calamity and Sword Venerable Firmament's Sword Tao, they still existed. However, Xiao Yin had many elixirs with him, and after taking them, his injuries had already stabilized. Facing Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper, who was in the Dharma ending realm, Xiao Yin was neither servile nor overbearing and faced him calmly. Although Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper's expression was calm, his gaze inevitably became complicated. Luo Qingwu, Chu Yang, and Zhu Gezhan came to Xiao Yan's side together. Ji Wenrui, Sword Venerable Li, and the other Shushan cultivators who had regained their freedom also came to stand behind Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper, all with gloomy and complicated expressions. Whether it was Sword Venerable Firmament or Sword Venerable Xiaoza, and the others who had been killed by Luo Qingwu, they were all long-time elders of the Shushan sword sect and core grandmasters. Their deaths caused the already unstable Shushan sword sect to suffer heavy losses. At this moment, the Shushan sword sect was in a terrible state, almost as bad as the situation after Ji Huang Xinyuan destroyed the sect in the Middle Era. However, one of the main reasons for this situation was Sword Venerable Firmament and the others themselves. Sword Venerable Firmament's death was also because he wanted to fight to the death with Xiao Yin. Moreover, Sword Venerable Firmament and the others had left behind a mess. The immortal Taichu sword formation had been broken, and the other major sword Dao sects had also been affected. There would be many loose ends to clean up after this. The war between the two worlds had not ended, and the Shushan sword sect was already in a difficult situation. Although Sword Venerable Celestial Dipper was still holding down the fort, the situation was not much better than the Great Qin Empire. Looking at the immortal heavenly sword that had broken again, the Shushan cultivators had even more complicated feelings. Looking at the current situation, Sword Venerable Firmament and the others had not participated in the previous battle, so they could not be counted. However, this was equivalent to sacrificing the heavenly immortal primordium sword formation for nothing. This made everyone in Shushan, from top to bottom, feel extremely depressed. This made it difficult for them to not have complicated feelings when facing Xiao Yin and the others. As for the actions of Sword Venerable Firmament and the others, Sword Venerable Astral Dipper and Ji Wenrui found it very difficult to use the words rebellion and internal strife to pin the blame on them. Xiao Yin and Luo Qingwu didn't say anything. Silently, They just stood there, waiting for Sword Venerable Tiangang and Ji1 Rue to make their own decisions. However, at this moment, the world suddenly shook violently. It was as if the ripples from the void outside the world were shaking the divine land's boundless world. The location was not at Shushan. It seemed to be extremely far away, and the commotion did not seem as great as the battle between Xiao Yin, Sword Lord Astral Dipper, and Sword Lord Firmament. However, Sword Lord Astral Dipper and Xiao Yin were both looking towards the northeast. White Cloud Mountain. Xiao Yin and Sword Lord Astral Dipper frowned slightly. The battle that was going on there was even bigger and more horrifying than the one in Shushan. Similar tremors had always happened before, but the one just now was especially shocking. Yudu race attacked White Cloud Mountain, and it was obvious that the battle had already reached its climax. Outside the boundary of the boundless world, in the endless void, an incomparable battle was currently going on. A huge humanoid beast covered in silver fur stood proudly in the void, its body flashing with purple radiance that was covered in black runes. A beam of pure black light shot out from its forehead, landing on a ball of light that seemed to be extremely big and yet extremely small at the same time. That ball of light flashed with a mysterious and indescribable brilliance. It retracted its defense with all its might to block the black radiance that the huge beast had given off. However, under the influence of the black radiance, the brilliance on the surface of the ball of light was continuously melting. Even though it became resplendent and bright, it became ordinary and lost that mysterious and high concept of power. However, on the surface of the ball of light, there were still rays of purplish-gold brilliance flowing endlessly. They were like long dragons that were helping the ball of light to block the black, profound light. As the long dragons roared, they shook the heavens and seemed to gather the faith of all living beings, forming a supreme, awe-inspiring might. It even faintly caused the chi of the earth veins in the boundless world of the divine land to tremble nonstop. Even though the purplish gold light dragons were shattering continuously, it slowed down the speed of the black profound light breaking through the ball of light. That huge beast was naturally the current chief of Yudu race, Yudu 12 Fantasy Sons, also known as Fantasy Son Yudu. Fantasy Son Yudu looked at this sight calmly. Is this gathering the so-called chi of the dragon vein in the mortal world of the divine land? In the void far behind him stood a bunch of Yudu beasts. They all looked like humans, and there were purple light markings on the surface of their skin. The two Yudu beasts in the lead were both extremely tall. One looked like an old man, and the other looked like a middle-aged man. The Yudu that was slightly older said silently, "It's fine if we don't look for them, but they still dare to come and pick a fight? Looks like our race has truly left this boundless world for far too long." He tilted his head slightly. Follow this so-called chi of the dragon vein and deal with it. Even though the master of Xiangate has news of him rushing back from Heaven Wasteland Vastlands, he can't split himself up, so he can only take care of White Cloud Mountain. When the Yudu beasts behind him heard that, they grinned and revealed a mouthful of sharp fangs that looked like a dragon or a wolf. The middle-aged Yudu waved his hand. "Granduncle Kong Yuan, there's no need to go through so much trouble. We could just end things here. The chi meridians that are connected to them will just shock those humans to death." The old Kong Yuan Yudu pondered for a moment and nodded. "Oh well, since Chief has already said so, we don't have to worry. Qing Wan, let me and you do it." He paused for a moment and turned to look behind him. "Jingyan, you come as well. Since we're going to fight, we might as well be thorough." Behind him and Qing Wan Yudu stood three tall Yudu beasts. The one in the middle heard him and nodded with a smile. He walked out of the crowd and came to the side of Kong Yuan Yudu and Qing Wan Yudu. The three great demons of Yudu roared at the sky at the same time and revealed their true forms. Terrifying demonic power rippled in all directions, and just one long roar tore cracks in the void. Unparalleled Yudu splendor. Ethereal splendor of Yudu. Radiant splendor of Yudu. One gold, one white, and one red. Three resplendent rays of light lit up in the void at the same time. Endless multicolored clouds and talismans and divine markings appeared at the same time, covering the sky and covering the earth. It was hard to tell the direction of the void. The three rays of light landed on the huge ball of light that was formed by the white cloud mountain of Taishu Temple, along with Yudu's profound splendor. Almost in an instant, the numerous purple-gold dragon shadows on the ball of light started to shatter. Qingwan Yudu sneered. The treasure that triggered the ritual isn't bad, but the cultivation of the person executing the ritual is too low. Even if it's the so-called power of all life and qi of the veins of the earth, it's only SOSO. Under the bombardment of the four rays of light, the qi of the dragon vein on the ball of light started to crumble. Even the ball of light that was formed by the white cloud mountain started to crumble. Under the guidance of the qi of the dragon vein, West Hill City and Tianjing City on the vast land of the divine prefecture suddenly shook. At this moment, the two magnificent cities seemed to have encountered an unprecedented strong earthquake. The huge cities that usually seemed unshakable were in danger of collapsing at this moment. Above the imperial palace of Tianjing City was a huge palace that was even more majestic and imposing than the imperial palace of Great Zhou. It was like the divine palace of an immortal king. It floated in the sky, and it was none other than the Grand Imperial Palace. Large amounts of qi of the dragon vein was gathered above the Grand Imperial Palace, and there was a huge ball of light above it. The ball of light flashed continuously, sending the qi of the dragon vein of Great Zhou and the qi of the dragon vein of Great Qin into the void outside the world to strengthen the white cloud mountain. At that moment, the pressure on the white cloud mountain suddenly increased, and the ritual couldn't take it anymore. The light that was formed by the qi of the dragon vein crumbled in large amounts, and the huge pressure spread along the dragon vein and tore through the void to attack the Grand Imperial Palace. Under the effect of that violent power, the ball of light above the Grand Imperial Palace was about to shatter. Under the guidance of the qi activity, West Tomb City and Tianjing City were on the verge of collapse. This is the limit. In the Grand Imperial Palace, Emperor Liangpan of Zhou had a solemn expression, but his gaze was calm. He seemed to be very confident. The spells on his hands changed continuously, and the huge Grand Imperial Palace shone brightly. A complicated yet simple and profound picture appeared and fused into the ball of light above the Grand Imperial Palace. The ball of light suddenly trembled and shattered in the sky, turning into flowing light that dissipated. The complicated and simple picture flashed in the sky for a moment. Under the flash of the picture, the terrifying pressure that came from the white cloud mountain actually flowed towards West Tomb City. The portion that flowed towards Tianjing City was blocked by the defense formation of Tianjing City that was strengthened by the qi of the dragon vein by the Grand Imperial Palace. At that moment, in the void outside the realm, the four strong practitioners of the Yudu race bombarded the white cloud mountain together, quickly disintegrating the qi of the dragon vein that was strengthening the mountain. Green Crest Yudu tilted his head slightly and sneered. Back then in the Spirit Sea, other than your Taishu Temple, there should have been a third power. Was it the Master of Xian Gate? Was it you guys or him who tried to reopen the Spirit Sea? No matter which one it was, both of you helped our race greatly. Otherwise, we might have had to wait a few more years before we could return to the boundless world. Mirage Sun Yudu had a calm expression. The terrifying Yudu profound light shook the heavens, and the overbearing black profound light actually forcefully broke the great void profound light that covered the sky outside the white cloud mountain. The white cloud mountain that had transformed into the nine heavens imperial court trembled violently, and the great formation of yin-yang that had fused with the great void profound light was also separated from the terrifying Yudu profound light. In the great void nine heavens imperial court, Tao Venerable Xian, Yin Nam Lai, and the Taishu Temple flashed and were separated from the great void nine heavens imperial court. Without the protection of the white cloud mountain and the formation, Tao the Venerable Xian Yi, Yinan Lai, Kuang Heng, and the rest had to face the strong practitioners of Yudu. The consequences were unimaginable. But at that moment, a vast purple chi spread out in the endless void and sealed the surrounding heaven and earth. The eyes of the strong practitioners of Mirage Sun Yudu, empty plains Yudu, green crest Yudu, and the rest flashed at the same time. The master of Xian Gate, Mirage Sun Yudu, slowly turned around. The purple chi dispersed and revealed a celestial mountain that was like white jade. On the celestial mountain, a seven-colored treasure tree glowed brilliantly, and its branches and leaves rustled. At the foot of the profound sky treasure tree, a youth in purple stood calmly with his hands behind his back. It was Lin Feng. Chapter 1222. In the void, Mirage Sun Yudu put away Yudu profound flower and turned around. Silently, he looked at Lin Feng, who was on the peak of Jade Capital Mountain. He said indifferently, "Master of Xian Gate, as expected, we will meet again soon." Lin Feng also looked at Mirage Sun Yudu, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. 12 Mirage Sons of Yudu. Mirage Sun Yudu said, "You appearing here means that the ancient devil ape race can reappear on Spirit Abyss Mountain? Is the current master of the ancient devil ape race a heaven-connecting profound handle?" As he spoke, his gaze became calm as though he was contacting someone. But soon, Mirage Sun Yudu's gaze flickered, and a slightly astonished emotion appeared in his eyes. He looked at Lin Feng again and examined him again. "You actually have such methods. Even though you have left, you can still trap the ancient devil ape race in Spirit Abyss Mountain. This is truly unexpected. I seem to have underestimated you." Mirage Sun Yudu looked at Lin Feng with a solemn and serious expression. He looked at Lin Feng and said, "I seem to have made the wrong decision. The main force of Taishu Temple and Haotian Mirror are staying in Xinhai, and White Cloud Mountain is merely an empty shell. They still have some power to guard their own mountain gate, but if they want to go out, there's nothing to worry about. On the contrary, no matter where you are, you always have power that makes people pay attention to you. I'll head straight to Spirit Abyss Mountain and get rid of you with the ancient devil ape race first. After that, I'll slowly deal with the rest. Things will be even smoother then." Mirage Sun Yudu's tone was calm, but it was obvious that he was speaking from his feelings. Even though there was regret in his words, as though he was reviewing his own mistakes, the confidence contained in his words could be heard by anyone. Even after knowing the strangeness and overbearingness of Lin Feng's heaven-severing sealed realm, Mirage Sun Yudu was only astonished before paying attention to him. He didn't have any fear. Silently, Lin Feng looked at Sun Mirage Yudu. The current chief of Yudu race in front of him was obviously an extremely pragmatic, strong practitioner. While possessing great power, he wasn't afraid to use other methods to expand his advantage and fight for the final victory. However, he was obviously well versed in the principle of combining oddities and righteousness. When the situation was out of his expectations and he needed to fight head-on, this demon didn't mind fighting head-on with his strength at all and was filled with confidence. Lin Feng chuckled. "I have long heard of the name of Yudu. Today, I finally see a living Yudu with flesh and blood." As he spoke, Lin Feng simply sat down at the peak of Mount Yujing. Then, he lightly patted the rocks at the peak of the mountain and smiled. "Grow, grow, grow." Yujing Mountain, which was originally 10,000 feet tall, instantly filled the heavens and earth, dominating the surroundings. Even in the endless void that made people lose their sense of distance, they could still feel the pressure and size of this majestic celestial mountain. On the peak of Jade Capital, the mysterious sky treasure tree gave off a glow that was like a crystal barrier. Together with the chaotic and hazy glow that Mount Yujing gave off, they merged into the vast and mighty cyclic purple chi around the mountain. Around the white jade celestial mountain, auspicious clouds that were the color of jade instantly appeared and shrouded the entire Mount Yujing within. In the next moment, Mount Yujing attacked the strong practitioners of Yudu race. Other than Sun Mirage Yudu stopping and turning around to face Mount Yujing, the three great demons of Yudu, Empty Plain Yudu, Green Crest Yudu, and Scenic Flame Yudu, didn't slow down at all, even though they were curiously looking at Lin Feng's side. Their berserk demon power continued to attack the people of Taishu Temple. Dao Venerable Xian Yi, Taishu Temple, and Yin Nan Lai were jolted away from the Nine Heavens Imperial Court. The Nine Heavens Imperial Court, that looked like a huge ball of light, immediately returned to the divine land of the boundless world, gradually changing back to the appearance of White Cloud Mountain. The great formation of Yin Yang of the Supreme Void was also violently shaken. Other than Kuang Hung, Dao Venerable Qing Ning, Fu Yunkong, and Lin Daohan, the other cultivators of Taishu Temple had their primordial spirits injured. The operation of the formation became incomparably sluggish. The group of strong practitioners of Yudu didn't give Taishu Temple any time to catch their breath. They attacked Dao, Venerable, Xian, Yi, and the rest, making it impossible for them to re-establish the Nine Heavens Imperial Court. The situation instantly fell into a chaotic battle. Sun Mirage Yudu looked at Lin Feng and Mount Yujing and immediately clawed at them. The silver-white hair on his claw transformed into a sky full of silver light that shone in the void. Around the silver light was a purple halo that was engraved with runes of black light markings. It revealed a powerful force that could shake heaven and earth. The silver light was the bones and tendons, while the purple light was the flesh and blood. The surface was covered with densely packed black light markings. Together, they formed a huge claw that grabbed at the auspicious clouds that were the color of jade outside Mount Yujing. Lin Feng's expression didn't change. The Taiji tattoo on his forehead continued to spin. In the depths of the Taiji tattoo, a true spirit, divine, marking shone brightly. In his eyes, misty rays of light flew out from his pupils. Every ray of light transformed into a Taiji tattoo. Black and white mixed together. Yin and Yang complemented each other. They spun rapidly in the void around Mount Yujing, glistening brightly. In the center of every Taiji tattoo, there seemed to be a figure sitting upright with both hands forming a mudra. Above the heads of these figures, rays of light shone and condensed into the shape of celestial mountains. Numerous Taiji tattoos, numerous figures, numerous celestial mountains, and numerous spells trembled together. They then struck a palm towards the galaxy in the universe and shouted in unison, "Go!" The divine art of changing heaven and earth was unleashed, shaking the celestial river of stars. It was as if billions of stars were going to change their paths and fall together. That extremely terrifying, boundless mighty force reinforced Mount Yujing, blocking the huge claw that Sun Mirage Yudu had grabbed over. At the same time, specks of light that were like dust scattered around Mount Yujing. Every speck of light landed on a Taiji tattoo. Those specks of light suddenly spread out and burst forth with a majestic power that could transform mustard seeds into Sumeru seeds. 49 specks of light transformed into 49 worlds, and the huge power also reinforced Mount Yujing. Sun Mirage Yudu's gaze flickered. "This divine art of yours is so strange." Lin Feng smiled faintly and didn't reply. His true body sat on the peak of Mount Yujing and gently clapped his palms together. More and more majestic power shook the dark void in the distance. Ribbons of light lit up in the void and turned from illusion to reality. They connected and converged on Mount Yujing, and it was as if a boundless world was pressing down together. Sun Mirage Yudu felt his hands suddenly sink. "Your paths, skills, and divine arts have fused into the skills of my race's heavenly Tao demon scriptures. Yet they are different." Large amounts of light flashed in Sun Mirage Yudu's eyes and filled the void like a vast ocean. "I can faintly feel the aura of the heavenly golden bead and grand heavenly immortal realm on your body. The other person in the spirit sea other than Taishu Temple is indeed you." Sun Mirage Yudu raised his other claw and gently waved it in the void. Immediately, a few streams of light streaked across and split the void with an unstoppable force as they attacked Mount Yujing. Lin Feng saw this and thought to himself, a Yudu in the middle of the calamity has revealed his true form. As expected, he's extraordinary. A small spot of light flew out from the heart of his brows and spread out. Countless runes and formation markings expanded into space and transformed into a huge formation that shrouded Mount Yujing. The center of the formation also landed on Mount Yujing with Ding of Shenzhou sitting in it. The formation circulated rapidly and transformed into boundless light. It was imbued with the jade-like auspicious clouds and swept towards Sun Mirage Yudu. Lin Feng took in a deep breath, and his body also suddenly expanded. He stood tall, as if he was the ruler of the universe. With a breath, there would be a void storm. With a stomp of his feet, the world would crumble. When he opened his eyes, it was like the sun and moon alternating. His right hand formed a spell, and his palm pushed forward. His left hand smacked on a Mount Yujing that was also as huge as the starry sky. The black and white divine light of creation immediately appeared on Jade Capital Mountain. One after another, balls of light rose from the black and white sea of light. Within the balls of light, countless chants of the great Tao rang out. It was as if gods had awakened one after another. They opened their eyes and chanted together. The surface of the auspicious clouds that were like white jade outside Mount Yujing was also covered in a layer of black and white light. It became more and more ethereal and vast. That terrifying aura made even the Yudu beasts fearful. Sun Mirage Yudu's light seemed to be able to slice heaven and earth and destroy worlds, but when it landed on Mount Yujing, it couldn't break through its defense. The black light markings on the surface of this Yudu, great demon, flowed endlessly, and the mournful wails of the great Tao in the void rang out endlessly. The belt of light that was formed by the great Tao of heaven and earth on Mount Yujing was continuously shattering. Phantom Sun Yudu was expressionless, and his violent power intimidated the heavens. Even though all the changes on Jade Capital Mountain were concealed under the auspicious clouds that were like jade, and he couldn't see the exact changes, he could clearly feel the power that was continuously becoming stronger. His reaction to this was to further strengthen his own power. The huge claw of light that was pressing down on Mount Yujing relaxed and retracted. Then, boundless light suddenly gathered together to form a ball of light. The ball of light had a silvery white core, and its outer layer was pure purple. There were large amounts of black light markings covering its surface, and it swirled in the void. Sun Mirage Yudu suddenly opened his mouth and spat out a beam of silver light, which landed on the ball of light. The ball of light instantly exploded and became incomparably dazzling. Beams of light shot out continuously in the void. A random beam of light could tear open the boundary and shatter the ball of light. The boundless void in the surroundings was riddled with holes, and it was on the verge of shattering. The power of the boundary stirred up the void and formed dazzling light that spread in all directions. It made Lin Feng and Sun Mirage Yudu feel as if they were in a boundless sea of light. The entire void was like a mirror, and at that moment, there were large amounts of cracks on the surface of the mirror. The beams of light that Sun Mirage Yudu executed were as sharp and glaring as needles, but they were also extremely terrifying. Any one of them seemed to surpass the sharpest divine weapon in the world. Lin Feng's void return conjured body seemed to transform into light at that moment, becoming half black and half white. Then, his body gradually fused with Mount Yujing. Heaven execution, sword formation. Lin Feng's voice rang out in the void, and in the next moment, a black sword formation that was unprecedentedly brutal appeared in the starry sky of the universe. Countless black light swords floated around the terrifying blood-colored chi pillar, and the huge sword formation drew upon the boundless brutality of heaven and earth to destroy all living things. The entire heaven and earth seemed to have transformed into a huge blood-colored sword that pointed straight at Sun Mirage Yudu. Light flashed, and a layer of jade-like brilliance appeared on the surface of the huge blood-colored sword. At the tip of the sword, there was a spot of black and white divine light that flowed continuously. In the next moment, as the huge sword danced, it slashed down the beams of light that were like an apocalyptic storm. Chapter 12:23. The ruthless edge of the sword was like an apocalyptic calamity as it swept across the void. The great Tao of heaven and earth had manifested and condensed into a stream of light to bless the surroundings of Jade Capital Mountain. But at that moment, the situation changed. The strips of light shattered under the terrifying sword edge of the Heaven Punishment Sword formation. The streams of light that Mirage Sun Yudu had unleashed were also sliced off by the tip of the blood-colored sword that seemed to be formed by the entire heaven and earth. I heard you have a ruthless sword that can destroy heaven and Tao and throw the universe into chaos. Light flowed in Mirage Sun Yudu's eyes. Your divine art seems to come from the same source as the concept of power of your sword. His huge body stood tall in the void as he shouted in a deep voice, "If that's the case, let me see that sword of yours." As he spoke, black light shone from the heart of Mirage Sun Yudu's brows. The black light looked incomparably deep, as though it was the darkest existence in heaven and earth. However, it was also incomparably dazzling, as though it was the center of the universe. The instant the black light appeared, the morning of the great Tao was clear and ear-piercing. It was as though the boundless universe was also mourning. At that moment, even Lin Feng, who was on Jade Capital Mountain, frowned slightly as he felt immense pressure. Silently, Mirage Sun Yudu said, "Yudu Xianhua." The violent black light only appeared for an instant before it collided with the power of Lin Feng's Heaven Punishment Sword formation. The void at the point of contact turned into nothingness and shattered into chaos. This chaos quietened down as the earth, water, fire, and wind were all annihilated. There was no way for new creation to be born. The black Yudu, Xianhua, shone continuously in heaven and earth, displaying its overbearing destructive power. It was pure and extreme, and its power seemed endless. Silently, Lin Feng looked at this scene and thought to himself, "It's similar yet different from the Yudu Xianhua of Yu Huang Celestial Sea." However, they both have extremely powerful destructive power. No wonder it can break the 9 heavens of the Great Void Palace. The Yudu race lives up to their reputation. This is the product of the combination of the innate divine art of Yudu's race and heavenly Tao demon scriptures. Only the true Yudu can unleash its extreme power. Even though the Enchantress and Golden Rock Sage cultivated heavenly Tao demon scriptures and refined Yudu Xianhua, they could only raise their power to a certain extent. They couldn't unleash it to its peak. Lin Feng's left hand needed a spell, and the index and middle fingers of his right hand formed a sword. All kinds of powers fused together and executed heaven execution sword formation to transform into a peerless sword edge to face the Yudu Xianhua of Mirage Sun Yudu. The ferocious edge of the sword drew boundless evil energy from the heavens and the earth, and it seemed as if everything in the world was coming to an end and the path of the Grand Tao had come to an end. Before it, everything in the world was ceaselessly being destroyed, and everything in the world was exhausted and walking towards destruction. Even that terrifying black, profound light seemed to have started to crumble and shatter when it was pierced by the blade of the sword. When the terrifying black, profound light was stabbed by the sword, the point of contact seemed to start collapsing. But under his execution, the Yudu Xianhua seemed to be endless. It flashed continuously, and its majestic power gradually wrapped around the huge blood-red sword formed by the Heaven Punishment Sword formation. While it was withstanding the sharp light of the sword, it was also bombarding the huge blood-red sword from all directions. Even though large amounts of black, profound entrances were destroyed, the world-annihilating sword formed by the Heaven Punishment Sword formation was also under immense pressure. It was like a peerless longsword. Although the sharpness of the sword was indestructible, there were countless sledgehammers smashing on the blade of the longsword from all angles, trying to twist and break it and completely shatter it. Under the shroud of the jade-like auspicious clouds, Lin Feng stood on Jade Capital Mountain, and his eyes gradually narrowed. Huan Sun Yudu said solemnly, "The grand heavenly immortal and the heavenly sea golden bead are with you. Are you the one who ruined Brother Tianhai's plan and our race's great plan to refine the spirit sea?" When Lin Feng heard that, he indifferently said, "The grand heavenly immortal and the heavenly sea golden bead are indeed with me." However, Yu Wang's celestial sea's plan was foiled by his own hands. After witnessing everything in the spirit sea back then, Lin Feng had already understood Yu Huang's celestial sea's complete plan after connecting all the causes and effects. Even though Yu Wang's celestial sea had perished and the other strong practitioners of Yudu had been forced to hide, there was a grand heavenly immortal who had shed his corporeal body and demon power. Even his demon soul had undergone special treatment, such that his soul imprint and memories weren't preserved. Thus, he had broken free from the restraints of the white halo formed by the power of the spirit sea. After reincarnating again and again, he had completely broken free from the surveillance of the spirit sea. Once this step was completed, when the grand immortal realm came into contact with the heavenly sea golden bead and awakened, the spirit sea that had been sealed by the Yu Huang Heaven Sea could be reopened. It was a secret door that the Yu Huang Heaven Sea had left behind. As for the grand heavenly immortal who was reborn as Yudu, after his spirit sea reopened, he immediately entered it through the golden seal stone talisman left behind by the Dark Emperor, Celestial Sea. When grand heavenly immortal entered the spirit sea, they would work together with Mirage Sun, Yudu, and the other strong practitioners of Yudu to remove the imprint that the spirit sea had placed on the Yudu strong practitioners in a short period of time. Then, they would work together to refine the spirit sea. During the Battle of Ing Sea back then, Grand Immortal Realm had fused with the Heavenly Sea Golden Bead to be reborn. After that, 2 years had passed in the Great Thousand Worlds, and only then did the Taishu Temple re-enter the Spirit Sea. If the Yu Wang Celestial Sea plan was successful, the Yudu race could even control the Spirit Sea without the people of the Heaven Primordial World knowing anything. However, there was a problem with Yu Wang Celestial Sea's plan. To be precise, it wasn't the plan itself that had a problem, but the person executing the plan had a problem. Grand Heavenly Immortal had been passively reincarnated again and again, so the problem naturally wasn't him. According to Lin Feng's speculation, there should be someone assisting in the dark in Yu Wang Celestial Sea's plan, ensuring that after Grand Heavenly Immortal Realm had reincarnated many times and got rid of the restraints of the Spirit Sea's power, the Heavenly Sea Golden Bead would help him awaken and open his Spirit Sea. Grand Heavenly Immortal had reincarnated for many lives, and his memories from his previous life were scattered. When he had just awakened, he needed someone to guide him, and at the same time, ensure that the golden seal stone talisman leading to the Spirit Sea bridge wouldn't be lost, so that Grand Heavenly Immortal Realm could enter the Spirit Sea at the first instance. However, this person suddenly disappeared. Thus, the Heavenly Sea Golden Bead passed through many hands and landed in the hands of Tao Venerable Heavenly Wind, the sect master of the Wind God sect in the human cultivation world of the Divine Land. However, countless people who had passed through and knew of the Heavenly Sea Golden Bead's existence didn't know the true use and importance of this treasure. Thus, the golden seal stone talisman that should have fallen into his hands immediately after Grand Heavenly Immortal Realm awakened was also lost by chance, and finally landed in the hands of the East Sea itinerant cultivator Tao Venerable Flowing Wave. Perhaps that person died accidentally, and the plan and secrets were buried along with him or her. Perhaps that person died in Yuwang celestial sea out of his own will, and after all the experts of the Yudu clan went into hiding, he refused to shoulder the responsibility and mission, or perhaps there were other reasons. In short, this person who should have existed no longer existed. Yuwang Celestial Sea's plan thus fell through, until by chance, Lin Feng replaced that person's position. He brought the Heavenly Sea golden bead and met Grand Heavenly Immortal Realm, prompting Grand Heavenly Immortal Realm to awaken. Only then did the Spirit Sea finally reopen, which led to a series of disputes in the Spirit Sea. However, although Lin Feng brought the Heavenly Sea golden bead and Grand Heavenly Immortal Realm into the Spirit Sea, he wouldn't continue according to Yuwang Celestial Sea's plan. Something went wrong with Tian Hai Imperial Brothers' plan. When Mirage Sun Yudu heard that, his eyes flashed as though he had thought of something. His gaze quickly became solemn, and he stared at Lin Feng. He slowly said, "The Heavenly Sea, Golden Bead, and Grand Heavenly Immortal Realm are with you. Between you and my clan, there must be a showdown. In less than 100 years, the Spirit Sea would reopen once again. At that time, Xianmin Tianzong and the Yudu clan would definitely compete over the Spirit Sea. At that time, other than each other, at least Taishu Temple would participate. Even if Taishu Temple's vitality was greatly damaged in the war between the two worlds, as long as their foundation wasn't completely damaged, they would still be strong competitors that couldn't be ignored when the next battle of the Spirit Sea came. In the previous mishap of the Spirit Sea, they had benefited from the mistake in Yuwang Celestial Sea's plan and the legacy of their seniors. Taishu Temple had instead become the party that had benefited the most. When the Spirit Sea reopened once again, their grasp of chances was even greater than Xianmin Tianzong and the Yudu clan. If Taishu Temple could tide through the calamity of the war between the two worlds, when they fought the Spirit Sea again, the Heavenly Sea, Golden Bead, and Grand Heavenly Immortal Realm would become even more important to the Yudu clan. It could greatly increase their chances of success. Lin Feng smiled. You guys threw yourselves into the war between the two worlds and stepped onto the divine land. Between me and you guys, there should have been a battle. Mirage Sun Yuda said, "That's right. Compared to an empty shell of Taishu Temple, you are a better opponent. However, you will still die here today." After saying that, the Yudu profound flower that shot out from the heart of his brows became even more vigorous and vast. It bombarded Lin Feng and Jade Capital Mountain. That black light spread out in the void, and large amounts of divine runes and runes lined up continuously. In an instant, it formed a profound and gorgeous sight. It filled up the boundless void and shrouded everything in its surroundings. Lin Feng focused his eyes and saw that in that scene was a brilliant galaxy. It wasn't a star formed by the demonic power of divine arts. Instead, it was a true galaxy that shrouded everything in the void. It flashed with dazzling starlight. The starlight and the black profound light fused together, and it was like a sky full of stars in the night sky. The majestic power shattered the surrounding space and pounced towards Lin Feng. The ribbons of light formed by the great Tao of heaven and earth were completely swallowed by the black profound light. The ear-piercing wails of the great Tao gradually quietened down, but the terrifying aura in the Yudu profound flower grew stronger and stronger. In the void of the sea of stars far away, stars suddenly became extremely bright and dazzling. At first, there were only one or two, but more and more of them appeared and became denser and denser. Those stars that had suddenly become exceptionally bright were forcefully extinguished by the terrifying demonic power that was far away. They burst forth with their final dazzling brilliance like fireworks. They were dazzling but short-lived, and there was even an aura of death. Lin Feng looked at the Yudu profound flower that had become even stronger, and the light in his eyes became even brighter. Then it returned to calmness in an instant. He smiled slightly and closed his right eye. A ball of light flew out from his left eye and circled above Jade Capital Mountain. When the light dissipated, A golden round plate was revealed. Lin Feng's heart moved, and a beam of purple chi landed on the round plate. The round plate instantly gave off rays of golden light and fused into the jade-like auspicious clouds outside Jade Capital Mountain. Just as Mirage Sun and Yudu executed the Yudu Profound Flower, the jade-colored auspicious clouds that shrouded Lin Feng and Jade Capital Mountain suddenly shone brightly with golden light. The light condensed into a round plate in the void, and with a spin, it suddenly started to gather the black profound light in the void. The Yudu Profound Flower that had originally had the upper hand was sucked in by the golden light plate, and the situation fell into a stalemate. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.